We're now live, Chair.
Lovely, thank you very much. All right, welcome everybody to this virtual meeting. This is actually the meeting of the Budget Scrutiny Panel for Charnwood Borough Council. Please note that this virtual meeting is being live streamed and recorded. The recording will be available on the Council's website after the meeting. Under the Openness for Local Government Bodies regulation, people may film or record this meeting, and this is outside our control. It is outside the Council's control. However, everybody who wants actually to record or film this meeting, they should do it in a way that it is not going to disrupt the business of the meeting. Also, I would like to ask everybody to switch off their mobile phones and also the smart speakers, Alexa, Siri, Cortana, and everything else, because all these things go against actually the data protection regulation. Now, because of the virtual nature of the meeting, I will ask every participant actually to introduce themselves, state their name, and confirm that they can hear and see the proceedings. If you want to speak, you can use the function called raise hand. It's a blue hand actually under, if I remember well now, under more. And you can find actually as a command raise hand. Okay? Do you understand about the raise hand, everybody?
Yes.
Good. Lovely. So I will start actually by calling every participant to, I will call them verbally, of course, where they are present and they can see and hear the proceedings. Right, Councillor Bolton.
Thank you, Chair. Councillor Jill Bolton. I confirm that I can see and hear the proceedings.
Thank you. Councillor Draycott.
Good afternoon, Mary Draycott, Councillor. I can see and hear the proceedings.
Thank you. Councillor Hamilton.
Thank you, Chair. I can confirm that I can see and hear proceedings.
Thank you. Councillor Harris. Councillor Harris. Is Councillor Harris with?
Yes, I'm so sorry. Yes, I can hear and see the proceedings. It's Councillor Harris.
Thank you. Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Parsons.
Yes,
Councillor
I can
Parsons.
see and hear proceedings. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Seaton.
I can see and hear the proceedings. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. And Mr. Angel, corporate member. Mr. Angel.
That Angel, independent chair of the committee. I can confirm and see you and hear you.
Thank you, Mr. Angel. Right, then I progress actually with our officers. Mr. Jackson, Simon Jackson.
Thank you, Chair. I can see and hear proceedings.
Thank you. Justin Henry.
Thank you, Chair. I can both see and hear proceedings.
Thank you, Mr. Henry. Leslie Tansey.
Thank you, Chair. I can see and hear the proceedings.
Thank you, Mrs. Tansey. Councillor Barclay.
Thank you, Chair. I can see and hear.
Thank you, Councillor. Sally Watson.
Thank you, Chair. I can see and hear.
Thank you, Mrs. Watson. And Mrs. Conway.
Thank you, Chair. I can see and hear the proceedings.
Thank you very much. So I progress with item 1, apologies. I have not received any apologies for this meeting. Everybody happy with this? Good. Item 2, minutes of the previous meetings. Can I ask, I hope that everybody has read these minutes. They are pretty extensive. And I would like to ask actually each member to confirm verbally that they are content to, with these minutes. Councillor Bolton.
Thank you, Chair. I'm content with the minutes.
Councillor Draycott.
Thank you, Chair. I agree with the minutes.
Thank you. Councillor Hamilton.
Thank you, Chair. I agree with the minutes.
Thank you. Councillor Harris. Councillor Harris, we cannot hear you.
Sorry, I thought I was unmuted. My computer was breaking down. I couldn't hear all of it.
Councillor Harris, we are just trying to confirm the accuracy of the previous minutes. Can you
Yes.
confirm that you are content with the minutes?
Yes, what that I've read, yes.
Thank you very much. Councillor Parsons.
Yes, I'm happy with the minutes.
Thank you, Councillor. And Councillor Seaton.
Yes, I'm happy that these are a true and correct record. Thank you.
Thank you. So I'm pleased actually to confirm the outcome of this discussion and the approval of the previous minutes. Right, item 3, disclosures of pecuniary and personal interests. So if anybody feels that they have any pecuniary or personal interest, can you please raise your hand? There are no hands raised, so I assume actually there are no pecuniary and personal interests declared. Item 4 is declarations by the party whip. According to the document I have in front of me, there are no declarations of the party whip. So I'm happy to proceed with the item 5 if everybody is happy. It is about questions and other committee procedures 1117. There are no questions being submitted. And we go to item 6. This is about the draft. Yes.
Chair, could I ask a question, Chair, just before you start item 6?
Yes.
I just wanted to ask, Chair, and I don't know whether other members might feel the same. I'm just wondering whether it's pertinent to deal with 7, 8, 9, and 10 to help inform our discussion of item 6, rather than discuss the draft budget and then deal with separate individual items which are part of the process, which may lead us to want to discuss things on item 6. I'm open to other views. I'm not set in my ways, Chair. I'm just wondering whether it feels more logical to discuss the individual items in 7, 8, 9, and 10 to help inform our discussion of item 6, rather than deal with 6 first and then be dealing with individual items afterwards. I'm happy to take your guidance, Chair.
I would agree with that, Councillor Parsons.
I would agree.
Thank you very much. Ms. Conway. Ms. Conway.
Yes, to you, Chair, that's fine. We can do an agenda variance. If the committee, if the panel's happy, we'll proceed through the agenda as item 7, 8, 9, 10, and then do item 6 at the end.
Yeah.
That's great. Then we all agree, I hope. Actually, we are going to proceed with item 7 and postpone item 6 after the discussion for item 7, item 8, item 9, and item 10. Right, so we start with the item 7. Item 7 is about general fund and HRA revenue outturn 2019-20. Now, may I remind you that there was a comment by Councillor Parsons calling for reflection on this particular item. You can find the details of this item in pages 12 to 24. Allow me to remind you that in page 12 of the document, what you see is the cabinet of the 9th of July 2020. And I hope you have already reviewed this document. I would kindly ask Mr. Jackson, Mr. Simon Jackson, to introduce the report. Mr. Jackson.
Thank you, Chair. Well, hopefully the members have had a chance, members of the panel have had a chance to have a look at this. So what we've got is a I think if I focus on the general fund, as paragraph 6 of the report says, there was an overspend on the general fund controllable budgets of just over £1.2 million. So there's a figure of 1231 in there. And then paragraph 7 to 15, 7 to 15 identify the major differences there. So we could, if you've hopefully had a chance to read it, we can maybe pick up some of those between myself and Mrs. Tansey, and then on those things are expanded in rather more detail on the appendices. So the appendices are on page sort of 20 onwards, really. So it goes through this in some sort of detail what the precise unders and overspends are. So we've got the budget. We've got budget on page 20, the general fund, a summary on appendix 2 as well. They've got the Loughborough special expenditure, which is appendix 3, and the housing revenue account on appendix 4, and appendix 5, more detail on the housing revenue account, etc. So there is quite a lot of detail. I think the main elements are within those paragraphs 7 to 15. So between Leslie and myself, we'll attempt to answer any questions the panel would have on those areas.
Lovely, thank you, Mr. Jackson. To start with, I have read this and I would like to congratulate about the detailed work you have put in this document. I don't have any major questions myself, so I would like to invite the members of the panel to ask their questions if they have any.
Raise hands.
Right, it is Councillor Draycott, I think, first, and Councillor Parsons following that.
Thank you, Chair. Just one question on the paper, and that's to do with paragraph 11 on page 15. The overspend of 43% of the budget, bad debt provision, it states, as a former member of Scrutiny Commission, I know it was considered about the payments from Fusion not being made. So my question is are they now regarded as bad debt? To my understanding, that means they're going to be written off. And I thought when debts were written off, it was because the person or business couldn't be found or etc. So could I just have a bit more information about why this now is referred to as a bad debt, please, Chair?
Can I invite Mr. Jackson to respond to this question? Mr. Jackson?
Yeah, sorry, I lost my mouse to unmute myself down the side of the chair, so apologies for that delay, Chair. It's a bit of a, I think where we are with Fusion is that it's a provision at the moment for bad debt. What that means is it's a bit of a moot point, really. So what we're saying in the accounts, it is prudent to provide or prudent to assume that we won't receive that money. At the moment, it's described as a provision. So that does mean the actual debt sits on our books. It doesn't mean that we've actually written it off out of the books. In many ways, it's just an accounting term. Even if we'd written something off out of the books and we were subsequently able to recover the money, we would do. And the fact that we've chosen not to do so, the fact we've chosen not to do so at the moment isn't enormously significant. But in reality, in reality, we are still working with Fusion and we've still got an ongoing relationship with them. So there is a possibility that over time we may be able to recover some element of that money in future years. But certainly it's not the case with Fusion that we've lost contact with them or that they've gone away. It is an accounting entry that reflects we believe it is prudent to allow for the fact that there's a good chance we won't get that money in future years.
May I invite Councillor Parsons to ask his question, please?
Yes, thank you very much, Chair. As much rather than a question than really a statement of observation. As you know, Chair, at the last meeting, it was me that just pushed quite hard to bring these accounts to this meeting. And it's not particularly to go through a great deal of detail. It's really to set the scene for the discussion around the budget we're about to discuss. And the points I really wanted to bring out from 1920 was, in a non-COVID influenced year, which is the 1920 financial year was only influenced by COVID in its final 2 weeks, we found savings hard to make. We found it challenging to make savings which had been identified the year before as being required. We found it challenging. That's not a criticism of us as a council. That's just the nature of things are tough. We had unexpected headwinds with the Six Hills sheltered living, supported living costs that came in unexpectedly at a very high level. Again, no criticism incurred on that, just things that happened to us as a council. We've had serious issues, in my personal view, around the planning situation and underspends, overspends. 2 years in a row, very significant amounts of money have been underperformed by the planning department for whatever reasons, and that's taken into account the fact that we put money into planning for a restructure of the department. The crux of what I'm trying to say to us as we go forward to look at 21-22, we should not underestimate the challenges and the difficulties. I'm delighted that in the minutes we at least got a reference that the audit committee wanted to send something through to Cabinet. For some reason, some members of audit committee found it very difficult to do our job, in my view, properly, which is to highlight the risks to our Cabinet members. And I don't like the fact that we couldn't get that through. We couldn't get our audit committee to send a report to Cabinet to say we recognise there are high risks. I know Cabinet members know that. I don't underestimate the work being done by our Cabinet. I know they know the issues. I know they're working incredibly hard. But it's right of us to continue as a scrutiny committee and as a budget scrutiny panel and as audit committee to be sending those warnings to make sure they're audited and logged through the process to ensure we are as individual members doing our job properly. I know when we go on to talk about the 21-22 budget that we're going to cut potentially scrutiny committees down by 2. In noting that, I wonder how well we'll be able to do our scrutiny job with half the number of committees and the same volume of work. I know for one, I find it challenging to keep on top of the finances, which is the area I spend most of my time looking at, audit, budgets, etc. The reason for pulling this into our debate today was to make sure we are under no illusions. And I know Cabinet members aren't, but our job as scrutiny is to highlight risk, consider risk appetite and challenge Cabinet. And that's my job. That's my job as an ordinary member to do that. So we just need to go forward in a year when the challenge was not that big in 1920, the headwinds were not excessive, and we had identified savings we should be making. We found it very difficult. And we now go forward to 21-22 post-COVID in an incredibly challenging environment. Changes to the Public Works Loan Board, which we'll come on to when we talk about 21-22 and the regulations surrounding that, which I think will mean we need to look at the Treasury strategy again. I don't know. We can't underestimate the challenge confronting us, and I know our members don't. We just can't underestimate it ourselves from the perspective of scrutiny. And I didn't want the 1920 accounts to just roll through unscrutinised at Scrutiny Commission or unquestioned. They were scrutinised technically through the process, but were not questioned in any way when they came to Scrutiny Commission. And we shouldn't let those sorts of opportunities go on how important the finances are. And that was in a year when we had planned savings plan in a relatively sedate, managed year. It's incredibly difficult. And we shouldn't underestimate that, Chair, going forward.
Councillor Parsons, thank you very much for your statement. I fully recognize your very good intentions. And I would like to personally thank you for your very in-depth analysis and approach in these matters. Any more comments, questions, or statements?
I
don't.
Through you,
Yes.
Chair, there's Councillor
Harris.
Hamilton. Councillor Hamilton was before everybody else has put their hands up again.
All right, I
since then.
didn't see Councillor Hamilton, sorry. Okay. Councillor Hamilton, please.
Thank you, Chair. This in many ways is really a follow-up question to what Councillor Draycott was talking about. So that's about the item 11 on page 15, which is about the overspend. Now, that was looking at 2019 and 20. And obviously, I know that you've said that you've made accounting provision for it, but looking at that and then kind of bridging over to what we'll be talking about 21, 22, you've got this terrible unexpected year that we're currently in, and having to kind of the cost of us having to carry the leisure centres during that period is, do we have, and of course the unexpected things that we're now going back into tier 3 as of tomorrow. So there's the risk around that. So in preparation for this kind of 21, 22 budget, what have we actually, do you have a feeling of what we have actually, the fusion content has cost us to date this year, and how that risk and that additional cost is going to somehow be reflected in the future budgets in terms of potential recovery or potential write-off? So do you have any information on that as to what the impact of this year is going to be looking forward?
Do you want me to answer that,
Yeah.
or are you happy to?
If you can remember the numbers, which I can't, Leslie.
Okay, just I can remember some of the numbers. So, but if I have to sort of come back, I will do. But on the leisure centres, we have a management contract of 234,000 a year, and as a consequence of obviously the leisure centres struggling to pay for that last year, we've basically claimed that money back from central government for this year. We're able to claim some monies back through a DCLG claim. We can't claim 100% of it back, but we've actually put in to claim a proportion of that money back from the government. On top of that, there was a subsequent very detailed cabinet report that then looked at how we could support the leisure centres to retain in business for this year, even though there was a period of obviously closure through lockdown 1 and obviously now lockdown 2. I can't quite remember the number exactly, something like 400,000 springs to mind, but the reason we've been able to support the leisure centres is because we have used the COVID emergency fund, another grant that we were able to get from central government to support leisure centres, and the cabinet report, I can't quite remember when that actually went, but that's a very detailed report about obviously supporting the leisure centre for this financial year. Moving forward to next year, you will actually see in the draft budget, we've got the figure of, I think it's 237,000 in as a pressure for next year, because until we've actually had further negotiations with the leisure centre, and the head of leisure services is in discussions at the moment with the leisure centres to try and look for some sort of resolution on, what we can do for next year. But we've certainly got that in as a provision for next year as well. So if there's anything else, Simon, that I've possibly missed on that.
No, I think that sums it up. But we have got something in the provision for next year, which we'll see in the draft budget. Obviously, a lot of these things, and it's a flavour of a lot of the numbers we've got in there. It's very dependent on how COVID plays out. So where we are at the moment, we'd obviously hope that the vaccination's on its way, the rollout will be efficient and effective. And as from hopefully 1st of April or soon afterwards, the leisure centres will be able to operate pretty much normally, as well as being open. Maybe some of the social distancing things will be relaxed, and the classes will come back as historically they were operated. So all of that will obviously help mitigate, or will obviously help us get much more back to normal. But the more back to normal we are, I think it would be fair to say the more optimistic we could be about the leisure centres next year. But when we get to looking at the draft budget, that's in there, and you will see the service pressure that we've recorded versus this year's budget when we get to look at that paper.
No, thank you for that. It's just that's just one of my concerns, because no matter how well intended, we're in a very uncertain environment right now. And we already knew there was a lot of challenges with respect to Fusion contract and the leisure centre. And then you've got this terrible year we're in right now. And it's almost like what assumptions you're putting moving forward and the risk around that, because as yet we simply don't know people's appetite to return to leisure centres, whether that will be a quick return or whether it'll be a kind of a gradual return back to normality. Almost like the psychological impact, irrespective of the success of the vaccination programme. And therefore that becomes a risk and a risk cost. And it's the uncertainty around moving forward and what kind of provision we can do to kind of cover that risk. That's all. It's just that's all I was trying to ask.
Yeah, I think that's very valid. I say when we get there, I mean, we've got Justin Henry with us, and Justin's the director responsible for that area. So maybe when we get on to the draft budget, there's the leisure centres, there's obviously other areas as well, many of which are worthy of a similar sort of discussion. So maybe when we get there, we can just briefly revisit this conversation.
Good. Thanks for that. Thank you.
Thank you. It is Councillor Harris.
Christine Harris.
Yes,
yes.
I said Councillor Harris.
Yes. Thank you. Actually, looking at the whole issue of debt collection, this is ongoing, though, isn't it? Maybe I should be asking Simon this, because in the past we've had debts that have to be dealt with, and they can be years down the line before we get any recompense, or if not at all. But we have this. This is just simply ongoing debt collection, which any council would have normally, and we would have probably other companies helping to sort all of this, and they take a cut out of any money that they get back. But this is normal practice, isn't it, Simon? As I remember, when we've had other debts, and some have been quite sizable. What would you respond to that, please?
Mr. Jackson, okay.
So, sorry, is that in respect to the leisure centre, Councillor Harris?
No, it's just general. I'm sort of standing sideways and saying we have normal debt procedures because we've had other debts that we've had to deal with and sort out in the past. And sometimes it takes a long time, but hopefully we regain some of that money back, hopefully. But I was just asking about this because this isn't just about this year, which is a bad year, with COVID and everything else. This is just normal practice, isn't it? We do have debt recovery and all of this going on.
We do, yes. I mean, what we would actually do would probably depend on the nature of the debt. So we do enforce council tax collections and rent collections. Certainly at the moment, we're being very circumspect how we go around collecting that sort of debt. we have sort of debts around business rates, which we obviously do seek to collect on a corporate basis. Things like Fusion and our major contracts, they're probably slightly different in the fact that we've got a sort of an ongoing a major business relationship with those sort of companies. So we would probably tend to do that through the sort of regular dialogues we would have with those sort of organisations. But yes, I think our debt collection is an ongoing business as usual activity. I just think with COVID, obviously adds a certain level of complexity, both in terms of us taking a view about do we cut people a little bit more slack, and then just the logistics of collecting the debt. So, for example, many of the courts have been closed up until relatively recently. So some of our enforcement activity has naturally had to wait or be put on the back burner, rather.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Any more questions? Lovely. So,
through you, Chair, Councillor Draycott, Councillor Seaton and Councillor Barclay. So
we've all got hands up.
Oh, sorry.
Councillor Seaton's like ready to go.
Yeah, I'm ready.
If we have Councillor Barclay can then.
I'm ready and raring to go. Thank you very much. I know we're the Budget Committee, but we also have to recognise the social responsibility to the leisure centres and how important they are to our community. And yeah, we're not quite certain what the uptake will be afterwards, but I can bet your bottom dollar that they will. People are chomping at the bit to get back to leisure centres and some sort of normality. And of course, they won't get back to those leisure centres the way they were before COVID because of all the precautions, but there will be a time we'll get back. And the alternative to supporting Fusion is to shut the doors. And once we've shut the doors, that's it. It will take us a long while to get back from that. But my initial question, so that was the statement. My initial question was about the 75% not refund or funding that we were trying to see if we could get back. Could you give us an update on that, please, Leslie?
Certainly, Councillor Seaton. So we've have to put some claims forward along with all the other the rest of the country. So there is a prescribed database that we have to obviously put our income losses in, and we have to follow some strict guidelines. We can't just put all income losses in. We have to look at, say for argument's sake, the town hall. We have to look at doing some mitigations on certain lines as well. What central government are doing, they're top slicing the first 5% of the budget figure, then they are giving us 75% of what we actually put the claim in for. Now, in terms of the first 4 months, we've actually claimed we've actually received £500,000 back from central government. So I'm pleased so far that we've been successful in that. And when if you will see the revised budget, we actually anticipated that we'd get £1 million back in lost revenue from the DCLG. So we need to put the next sort of quarter's claim in. So hopefully, even though with COVID and we've got car park income being down, and that brings in £1 million a year, there's lots of other income lines, there's markets, there's planning income, all those lines have gone into the return. So we're hoping, obviously, by doing this return, it's obviously going to help our revenue position and retain some of our reserves. We've actually set the revised budget to reflect COVID reductions and to reflect the fact that we will get this £1 million income in On top of that, we have got some COVID emergency fund that I've already mentioned that we are using for things like supporting the leisure centres and supporting homelessness and supporting lots of other COVID related matters across the council. So all of those have been channelled through the senior leadership team.
Thank you very much. And had the fusion centres been run by the council still and not by fusion, and still run by the council, we wouldn't be looking at being able to claw that back, would we? Possibly.
Yes, I think we'd still be able to do that, but again, we'd have to net down some of the costs that possibly sort of some of the running costs, like sort of through closure, through, you know, like gas, electricity and things like that. So obviously the government are not just looking for the gross income line, they're looking for the net effect. So what we've been able to do here, we've split the leisure centres into two. So we've been able to claim back the management fee that we've not been entitled to this year. Obviously that won't be 100%, and we've managed to support the leisure centres using the emergency funds. So we've actually used the money to support the leisure centre and obviously make sure we're covering some of our own costs as well.
The reason why I said that is you all know I'm Thurmaston, and our particular problems in Thurmaston are that we own our leisure centre and we run it, and we own our parks and we have to maintain them, and we haven't actually been able to get anything back, and I, you know, the reasons we were given is because it's local government and it's local government run. I'd sort of made that assumption that if Charnwood still ran the leisure centres, they'd be in the same position as probably Thurmaston Parish Council. But obviously they're not. There's some way you could still have claimed it back. So, okay, thank you.
I think actually it is Councillor Barclay.
Thank you, Chair. I thought members might be interested to know that Fusion, as I understand it, have got a 30 million government loan, which will certainly support their survival. And I think it's also worth noting that had we closed the leisure centres down and then had to reopen them, the cost would be substantially more than and I condone what Councillor Seaton said, that it is an important element of what we do, and it's certainly been a difficult year. It's going to be even more difficult in 21-22, but there is hope, and I haven't got the power of prophecy any more than anyone else has, but that's a major sort of a good omen, really, that they've got that money, which should help them survive, and hopefully this time next year we'll be back in business.
Thank you, Councillor Barclay. I don't see any more hands raised. Thank God, actually found out how to see the raised hands.
Sorry, Chair, just a quickie. Can you just clarify something that Councillor Seaton said? When we're talking about fusion, are we talking about just the Loughborough Leisure Centre, or are we talking about both of them in Charnwood? Because I'm thinking the discussions we're having when we talk about fusion is both of them. That Councillor Seaton was saying that they own it, presumably Thurmaston Parish Council. I'm a bit confused. Can we just clarify the position?
No, that's a completely different thing, and it's three that the fusion run, isn't it? So
in the borough, yes.
Yeah.
Yes, it is.
Nothing to do with Thurmaston.
Mount Sorrel.
Sorry, so the one that you were referring to that the council doesn't own
is Thurmaston's.
Is Thurmaston.
Thurmaston Parish Council own it.
Oh, really? Okay.
Yes.
Yep.
That's what I was saying. We are in a unique position because as a parish council, we own our own.
Right. Sorry, that's new. Yeah.
With that comes great responsibility of the costs. So.
Yeah, and appreciated that. Thank you.
Right. Thank you very much. I cannot see any more hands raised, and I have to say, actually, I remember very well the discussions we had about the leisure centers. And if you remember, it was actually rather traumatic debate back then, and we all felt actually it was worth taking the risk for the good of the people. So just to remind everybody what we discussed back then. Thank you very much. If there are no more questions, may I dare to go to the recommendations from this item? Are there any specific recommendations by the members of the panel?
I think I'd suggest we just note the report, Chair.
Thank you. So we note the report. And we can proceed to the next item. About commercial and property acquisitions process. These are pages 25 to 27. Right, may I kindly ask Mr. Justin Henry to introduce the report, please?
Certainly, thank you, Chair. Many months ago, in October, Budget Scrutiny Panel requested further information, which is contained here in the report. There have also
we cannot hear you very well, Mr. Henry.
Sorry.
Could I just interject here, Mr. Henry, and ask Nikki, do I have to declare anything because of the decisions I made as a scrutiny commission?
So my understanding, Councillor Seaton, is the decisions you make at Scrutiny Commission relate to specific commercial property acquisitions. I believe the process that Justin Henry is going to take us through is the generic process.
Thank you very much, Nikki. Thank you.
Okay, it's noted. Thank you, Mr. Henry.
Certainly. And Chair, can you hear me any better now?
Slightly better, thank you.
Slightly better, okay. A number of months ago, the Budget Scrutiny Panel requested further information on process, determining net returns, rationale beyond increasing budgets. A number of events have transpired since that point. Namely, there was a training session on commercial property, which was offered to members, which was very well attended. I believe we had on the order of 42 members attend that session and go through that. The slides have been circulated and they're quite self-explanatory. I'm quite happy to go ahead and run through it again, but and it's also covered in the capital strategy that was approved on the 9th of November. So from that perspective, all of those elements were addressed. However, in the interest of completeness, within the report, we talked briefly about assessing suitability, due diligence is required. There was a specific question about the impact on council tax rates, which there is no impact at all. No direct correlation between council tax rates or the setting thereof. I briefly addressed the rationale of increased limits on commercial property, as well as those for town deal and enterprise zone in the capital strategy. So with that, Chair, I'd like to just offer the floor to members to ask questions.
Thank you very much for your report. There are quite a few hands raised. Can I take the opportunity to ask a clarification actually about page 27, paragraph 2. It reads, some well-known councils have invested very large sums that have raised questions and concern. Some good current level of planned investment is far, far below these levels. I very much welcome this statement, but can you give us an idea what is the level of the borrowing of the other councils and what is the approximate proportion of our borrowing compared to them?
Certainly. Certainly, Chair. From that perspective, I think the most well-known and most present in the media is Spelthorne. They're leveraged or in debt up to about £1 billion. From that perspective, they're a borough council or a district council like ourselves, and not much larger. So they've gone many multiples beyond their net general fund budget from that perspective. There are others, Runnymede and others, who have gone well into the hundreds of millions. So by that stretch of the imagination, we're many orders of magnitude below that, with £25 million, quite near the bottom of those councils that are actually undertaking the activity.
Thank you very much, Mr. Henry. I find that somewhere the raised hands are actually in order of priority. So I guess actually this Councillor Bolton.
Thank you, Chair. This isn't a question so much as a point I wanted to make. We're going to be very reliant on the commercial income coming in from the properties that we're buying, and I think therefore that it's really important that the income that we're receiving from each of the properties is monitored on a very regular basis. And far be it from me to wish to add to the burden of the workload of Scrutiny Commission, but I think some group within the council needs to take on that sort of independent monitoring, if you like, of the income. So, and I'm sure that will be done internally, Justin, by the officers. But I just feel as a councillor that I have a duty as well to make sure that we know immediately if at any stage we're not going to hit the target, because that will have a huge impact on the finances of the council overall. Thank you.
Thank you. Through you, Chair, I'll respond if I may. Thank you, Councillor Bolton. You're absolutely right. From that perspective, we will undertake internal officer-led reporting and analysis of that moving forward. That could become a standing item on scrutiny. But we certainly want to go ahead and introduce that through audit to make sure we have a proper channel of communication through that piece. It's important to show that transparency and understand what the risks are and how those are being managed as we move forward. So entirely agree with that. The second thing to comment on, which is related to your previous point, is about a property reserve, whereas we will need to, in effect, hold back some monies in a dedicated reserve to smooth that cash flow if there are disruptions, and there very well may be. We have to plan for this eventuality. There is a methodology by which we actually calculate those. This is actually, methodology is actually recommended by CIPFA, and there are models that I've developed in the past at previous authorities, which I will translate into Charnwood from that perspective. So we understand what that looks like. We understand that it's compliant, and we understand that it would give us a view over a range of years in terms of what our exposure looks like. So we're not necessarily just worried about next year. We might be worried about 5 years from now as well. So we need to understand how that reserve requirement fluctuates over time. So from that perspective, it is something that both Simon and Leslie and I have discussed, and we will be bringing forward in due course, probably within the first quarter of next year.
That's great, Justin. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. I think actually it is Councillor Draycott.
Thank you, Chair. My question is that in all of these papers we've got today, there's no mention, or sorry, we've got no actual report about the capital programme. I know we're looking at the general fund, the revenue budget, but we've got no capital programme reports. And with this change step that the council is taking, acquiring purchases, as Councillor Bolton has pointed out, there's a very important role for councillors to be doing right from the start. So my question is, where is the capital programme reports, the outturn or the predicted for next year? Because as a committee, that's equally important for us to be looking at, Chair.
Like me to answer that, Justin?
Yes,
please, Leslie.
Please.
If I can just answer that one just briefly, the capital programme update report is going to the 10th of December's cabinet, and that will include any adjustments to the programme, and that will include appendices, which then brings in the capital spend. So that will highlight those capital projects, the commercial projects that we've already purchased to date. So that's very much included in that cabinet report on the 10th of December. It will, in terms of spend on that will get reported there. And then the monitoring, as Justin said, we've already set some revenue codes up for the commercial properties, and we'll bring that into our revenue monitoring on a quarterly basis. So it'll be transparent like all the other budget codes that we have set up. Thank you.
So, Chair, can I just ask Nikki then, what's the date of our next panel meeting, please? Will we have a chance to look at this report?
It's the 5th of January is your next panel meeting.
And we're expected at that meeting to what? Put recommendations together?
You are, yes, in terms of, well, it's an item later on the agenda, which we were going to discuss on how you were going to propose recommendations, because at the 5th of January meeting, you will be finalising and agreeing the final report that will be submitted to Scrutiny Commission.
But we've not seen the capital programme or the draft capital programme for next year.
I think you had an opportunity at the September meeting to put forward what items you would like to see at this meeting, and the capital programme wasn't mentioned.
Yeah, I accept that, but I think we've got to find a way of doing that, Chair. Whether it means we're perhaps going to have another meeting, or we all check the report that's going to Cabinet and send comments in. We've got to do something about the capital programme, Chair. As a panel, we need to be making some comments on it, particularly with this huge change that the council is taking. And as I say, we need to be in at the start of it all. And it's got to be included in the budget report as well.
Can I try and unravel this slightly? So, if I may, Chair.
Okay, thank you very much. Please.
Yeah. So the exam question for this panel really is around the general fund and HRA budget for 21-22. So it is to sort of review the process by which that budget has been set, and then comment on the decisions made, and then make recommendations on the basis of that review. The capital programme is something we set on every other year on a 3-year basis. So what happened was the capital programme for 3 years was set last year. So that's when we would have looked at it, and and we wouldn't look at it again until next year, if that makes sense. So if I get my years correct, so we would have looked at the 3-year capital programme for the years 2019 to 2022, 2021, yeah, until 21-22 last year for a 3-year period. And next year, we'll look at the capital programme for the years 2022 to 2025. So that's how the capital programme works. So we're not actually setting a new capital programme in this year. What we did do, which was unusual, is that we did an updated capital programme in response to COVID, and an updated capital strategy in response to COVID. And they're the reports that went to Cabinet in October and went to Council on the 9th of November. So that was those reports. The report that is going in December is a routine amendment report. So actually the key differences and the key elements of the capital programme are as they were set out actually in that November council report. In December, from memory, it's the usual type of amendment. So I think we're adding on £20,000 for some IT kit to develop the hybrid meeting facility, that sort of thing. So relatively minor changes through the capital plan amendment report. That also picks up the progress of the capital plan through the year. But it's a relatively minor report. So it's actually when we go into the budget scrutiny panel process next year, assuming it's something similar, next year we will be looking at a capital program. So we will be looking at the new capital program in detail, and obviously at that point the budget scrutiny panel has an opportunity to decide to what extent they want to look at it. But we're not actually planning to do any major change to the capital program from the 1st of April, and we won't be planning to take a new capital program to Cabinet and then Council in February. So no doubt there can be mechanisms via scrutiny to have a look at where we are with the capital program, and that's a valid scrutiny topic generally. But in terms of this budget scrutiny panel, it's not really part of what I believe the scrutiny panel needs to look at this year. It's not a report that we're actually taking to Cabinet or Council.
I thank Simon for that clarification. It's just that I do feel the direction the Council is now taking is a new one, and that it would have been, but it's our fault as councillors, quite clearly, that we didn't ask for that report. So all we can do is to wait for the report to go to Cabinet then on the 10th of December and keep abreast of what's in there, and maybe scrutiny can pick that up at some stage before next year. I think that's what you said would be the time to look at it, or was it the year after?
This time, sorry, through you, Chair, this time next year, we will be developing the new capital programme. So that's when we'll look at this in a significant way. Obviously, the amendment report going in December, Scrutiny Commission can have a look at that as well. I'm not sure it's been selected actually. I can't remember whether the Scrutiny Commission have actually selected that one to have a look at or not, but that's there. And if this panel wanted to have a look at the capital plan, they could do, but it's not something that we're planning to take to Cabinet or Council in any significant way, other than the sort of standard amendments that arise through the year. So it's not something we're looking at in any significant way at this point in time.
Okay, thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Jackson. Thank you, Councillor. Can we proceed actually with the questions by Councillor Parsons, please?
Thank you, Chair. The changes to the Public Works Loan Board on the 26th of November, that we can no longer borrow from the Public Works Loan Board or commercial property to generate yield. We specified that we needed 25 million. We were going to borrow 25 million. Statements were made. I praise the statements that were made and pseudo-minuted that was the level we needed to generate the revenue to help plug the gap in the further years. My sense of the capital strategy and the commercial strategy are that sort of sitting behind both of those documents, even if we borrowed internally from our own treasury function, and I would be nervous about borrowing 25 million internally. That's a scale I'd be nervous about, given how much we hold. I've always felt that, it was always slightly better because behind it sat the PWLB, that sort of the way the documents are written, we could always kind of recapitalize something using PWLB cheap money. We had that ability. That's now gone. And I mean, it's gone in no uncertain terms in the Treasury statement on the morning of the 26th of November. I've read that statement on the PWLB. And I mean, it's very emphatic. Councils can no longer borrow for commercial property to generate yield. So do we now need to relook at the budget for next year and the commercial income that we are hoping to generate, in the light of the increased risk, if we're going to borrow that money internally to get the revenue we want to plug the gap, given that the PWLB opportunity is now gone?
Through you, Chair, I'll go ahead and respond to that, if I may.
Yes, of course. Thank you very much. Please carry on.
Thank you, Councillor Parsons. You're quite right in that the change came out last week. However, the statement by Treasury perhaps does not fully explain the entire situation, as would the guidance that is posted on the PWLB website, as well as the responses to consultations that have been circulated amongst local government finance professionals. The proposal to actually cut off council's ability to borrow from the PWLB is predicated on the fact that if commercial property investment remains on a capital program or a capital plan, and we would need to submit 3 years worth of that for their inspection. That's to say the PWLB is not the only game in town. Lots of councils borrow on the private market. There are other alternatives, and we are also looking at that. And that's not to say that they're any less competitive than the PWLB would have been. The beauty of the PWLB was the fact that you can literally pick up the phone and 48 hours have the money in your account, whereas other lenders would have a more arduous process for accessing funds. That being said, the internal borrowing position that we have taken as a council has been checked with our Treasury management advisors. We feel fairly comfortable with that. And we know that if we complete this tranche of investment, we could potentially then alter the capital plan, which we can do at any point of any year, and send it back through council for approval, at which point the items could be removed, it could be resubmitted to PWLB, and access would be granted again. So it's only, the access is only cut off through the virtue of having it as an active activity on the capital program. And I think this is a very important point to note for members, which is the activity is not illegal. We are still legally allowed to purchase property. There's nothing barring us from that. They have not changed statute. That has not changed. What they're trying to say is public monies will no longer be able to be borrowed to go ahead and fund said activity. But that's to say they're not the only game in town. We are evaluating our options. We are looking at other options available in the market in terms of whether it's intra-authority lending or private sector lending, in terms of what that does. Probably by way of a progress update, we're not far off having spent the entire job lot. So we're very close to being done in any event from that perspective at the first tranche, all being well, touch wood. So from that perspective, quite right to note it, quite right to be concerned about it. We're also aware of it. We're managing it. It's not quite as dire as the sound bites make it sound.
Thank you. I appreciate that. Some of the nuances I had gathered over the 3-year application for the capital plans and bits and pieces. From my audit perspective, I perceive it's riskier. PWB always feels like a safer home for these sorts of risks than other borrowing sources. And I would just know, I don't know, I haven't been back to the capital strategy and the commercial strategy to check whether I think they need rewriting because of the references to PWLB. I know there are references to PWLB in both documents, and I haven't been back in detail to both documents yet since the 26th to understand the nuances. It always felt like we were underwriting certain aspects of our investments by being able to say if we needed to, we could fall back and borrow from the PWLB. Now, if that's the case, we're going to need to rewrite those documents, not say that, to say there are alternative sources. And also, as an audit committee member, I need to make sure I ask audit committee to note if we feel there is now an increase in risk because we cannot access PWLB money. I mean, it's very, I know what you're saying about the nuances, but I mean, it's very categoric in the statement from Treasury. Local authorities will not be able to borrow for commercial property to generate yield as from the 26th of November. So we've got to get our ducks lined up. But you know, I support the fact that we should be more commercial. I support the fact that we should stand on our own 2 feet as much as we can. But from a process, risk, audit perspective, again, I've got to do my job as best as I can. And I sense there is increased risk, and I would encourage other members to see that. And if they vote against it, fine. I can't do anything about it. I can only do what I can do, say what I feel. And I sense it's an increased risk, and we're going to have to take that into account when we discuss the 21-22 budget in a moment.
Thank you, Councillor Parsons, and you're quite right to point it out. This is always about managing risk, and unfortunately, risk is not a nice, stable continuum of one level. It has peaks and troughs and moves over time. We can certainly go ahead and talk about that. As I said, we very nearly finished the investment phase anyway. Total expenditure, if we finish the last transaction, will have us at about £23.5 million. That is forecasted to deliver. If we are actually able to deliver the last transaction, near about £1 million worth of net revenue to 21-22. Once those investments are actually secured, the risk is reduced significantly. Now we can still access it, so provided we alter capital program and the capital strategy, we resubmit that, we regain access to the PWLB, we can still externalize debt. It's a normal treasury management function. We can still do that. So that is absolutely not a problem. And then, of course, at that point, the risk is mitigated yet again. We still have that access. And of course, with the 100 basis points reduction in rates, that of course would become rather easy for us to go ahead and manage. So risk is probably more short term than it is medium term to long term. Certainly in terms of revenue, the risk is lower and not really affected by this particular element. This is really about our ability to service debt internally. Can we maintain that internal borrowing position? And as I said, Treasury Management has given advice, our Treasury Management advisors have given us advice on that position, and we feel fairly comfortable with where we're currently at without putting any kind of undue risk or pressure on internal budgets. Sorry, Chair, you're on mute.
Unmute. Sorry. I'm sorry about this. It has its own brain. Now, quite a few hands raised, and I think next is Mr. Angel. Mr. Angel, please.
Thank you. Through you, Chair, could I ask Justin, paragraph 5 of the report talks about the town deal and enterprise. And it mentions in some cases, business cases will not stack up to be financially viable. And it talks about additional funding being required to create the financial outcomes that are required. How far above would you envisage additional funding be to finance something that doesn't stack up financially?
Sorry, Mr. Angel. Sorry, Mr. Angel, you broke up very briefly there. Could you just repeat that for me, please?
I'll start again. This paragraph 5, town deal and enterprise zone. You say it's times these business cases will not stack up to or be financially viable. And you talk about additional funding being required. What level of additional funding do you envisage may be necessary in these cases?
Thank you, Mr. Angel. I think it's difficult to say because it's all going to be, the requirements going to be dictated by the individual business case. Predominantly, what this is intended to say is there may need to be some forward funding or additional funding coming from the council to actually deliver some of these projects, whether it's, I don't know, perhaps it's a £200,000 space improvement through to a £2 million redevelopment. It could be any one of those things, but for whatever reason, funding within the project, whether that be usually private, might not be accessible, or sufficient levels might not be accessible, at which point the council would need to go ahead and, well, not need to, but could potentially step in and fill that gap. But again, with a commercial view. So gone are the days of free money where we used to just give it away for a lot of to deliver a lot of these projects. We'd obviously want to take a commercial view on that and make sure that we were weighing up social value with financial return, and there was the right balance from that perspective. But it will be as they come. The certainty is there will be lots of projects that would add a lot of social value to the borough. that might not have the financial strength within them as they stand to be delivered, at which point we would probably intervene. Simon, did you want to go ahead and add anything to that answer?
Yeah, thanks, Justin. I mean, I think the situation with the enterprise zone and firstly, I don't think as a council we're in a position to take anything on that has a significantly adverse impact on our budgets. I think where there's maybe a difference between the enterprise zone and regeneration opportunities compared to commercial property is that in those situations we'd probably find lower or a lower return acceptable, or maybe even a break-even analysis. And if it's regeneration, probably what we would do is, or potentially what we would do, and obviously it would be on a case-by-case basis, is think about things like growth and additional council tax revenues or business rates that might be generated, and we might take those sort of things into account when we're putting a business case together, which clearly, well, we certainly wouldn't do when we're evaluating the sort of pure commercial property business cases. So the return would be lower, and we would accept a sort of a break-even analysis, and obviously depends on the opportunity. And if it came with sort of lots of jobs and high street regeneration and that sort of economic development benefits with it, then we'd obviously take a different view. But I think where we are as a council, we're certainly not in a position, as Justin said, to be taking on borrowing, which is going to end up costing the council money in terms of interest ticket, potentially MRP charges, and potentially ongoing revenue costs. So, borrowing money to build a park and then having the sort of ongoing maintenance for that park is, hypothetical example, but that's something we'd probably not be in a position to do at this point in time.
Thanks, Simon, for that. That's reassured me.
Thank you very much. So next in the queue is Councillor Barclay.
Thank you, Chair. Just to reiterate what Justin and Henry said, we're going to evaluate any commercial borrowing that we do, irrespective of where the source of lending is coming from. It will be commercially assessed, and actually, to be honest, it doesn't change an awful lot where we get the lending from. The lending criteria has got to fit into our assessment, so it's not such a staggering blow. I mean, we will still have the ability to borrow from the Public Works Loan Board, as long as our capital plan doesn't have that commercial investment in it. And probably by next April it won't, because we've done most of the borrowing that we need to do. So we can, and you don't have to give a reason to borrow from the Public Works Loan Board, except it cannot be for commercial property. So we can backfund any of the capital program we want to without too many questions. But I thought it might be useful just to reiterate that irrespective of where the borrowing comes from, it's not what we're still going to assess it. And make sure that the return is sufficient to justify what we're doing. And the other point I'd make is the capital plan. It is completely separate from the budget, and it's up to this committee to decide what they want to do. But I think, as Simon Jackson said, the real aim of this committee is to look at the budget for 21-22. And also the capital plan can be assessed by scrutiny. And if you want to look at the capital plan, but it's rather diverting away from the sole purpose of the committee. But that's all I've got to say. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you very much, Councillor. I don't see any more hands raised. Anybody else to make a statement or ask a question? If not, may I ask the panel to consider any recommendations on this item? If there are no recommendations, can we say actually we note the report?
Agreed, Chair.
Thank you. Right, we proceed with item 9.
Long standard paper. Yeah.
Okay, that was Councillor Seaton. Right, we proceed with item 9, enterprise zone and town deal process. May I ask Mr. Simon Jackson to introduce the report, please? Oh, may I clarify, actually, this report is in a supplement. Which I better show you. The supplement is this one. It's at the bottom. It says actually enterprise zone. Okay. Are you sure you have the supplement?
Have members got hold of that? If I may, I'll just summarise. So both the enterprise zone and the town deal, what we've done is created a pot of money to draw down as and when we have the opportunities to invest in those areas. So there was £15 million for each area. So the question was generally around benefits, assessment of profit, risks, liabilities, and impact on council tax rates. So that's the sort of first bullet on that supplementary report. In terms of the enterprise zone first, so out of the 15 million we've set aside, we have had the first bid or the first request for forward funding, and that I think to be absolutely precise, the recommendation was a bid for up to £3.5 million. But actually, as we've been through the process of refining and going into the details of that bid, what we'll need to forward fund in this occasion, which is a forward funding bid for Charnwood Campus, is £2 million. And in the supplement, I've summarised the details really. So this one is about jobs and economic development. So this particular project is about refurbishing a building on the campus site. I think the total value of the project is £3.5 million, hence the number quoted in the cabinet report, but the forward funding required will be £2 million. So what we'll be doing is making a loan to the local enterprise partnership, who will then grant that money onwards to the campus site. It is a slightly odd way of working, and then we will recover the money through business rates. So what will happen is, rather than remitting those monies to the enterprise zone, to the LEP in accordance with the agreement we have, we'll just hold back the money that we need to have the loan repaid. So what we're actually talking about precisely in this case is a £2 million annuity loan repayable over 4 years. The repayments work out at about £537,000 a year. So based on interest rates actually before the PWB announcements. But what that means for us is there will be about a 1% uplift. So there is a slight margin that we will make on that, which will be around £20,000 a year. So it won't be life changing, but it will be a small positive amount, and that's 1% reflects the fact that it's we consider it to be a pretty low risk investment due to the amount of business rates that's coming off the site. Plus, also we will require the site sponsors, who are Charnwood Campus, to underwrite the loan. So that's what will happen. 1% margin. In terms of council tax, it won't affect the council tax rate that we set at all. Again, it's subject to member agreement, but I think from a Section 151 officer point of view, over the next few years, I'll be looking or I would be recommending that the council increases council tax in line with the maximum limit, that we're able to do so without holding a referendum, so it won't actually affect the council tax. So that's that particular forward funding agreement. Others we do anticipate will come forward as and when. Whether they all come forward, whether we have £15 million worth in this financial year is obviously a moot point. There is one of these that is in process on the LUCEP site at the moment, but that's got a little way to go. So if that does come forward, that's likely to be in the new year. And like in this case, there will be a cabinet report for members to look at, and it will be obviously subject to the usual scrutiny processes. So I suspect if it does come forward, it may well be one that the Scrutiny Commission will be interested in due course. So that's the enterprise zone, and the town deal and regeneration funds work in a similar way. But as of now, we've had no opportunities have arisen. So there's nothing particularly to report on the town deal side of it.
Thank you very much, Mr. Jackson. May I take the opportunity and actually congratulate you for this document. I found it extremely useful. I had actually to go to the internet a few times actually to clarify some details. Now, can I bring your attention to page 10 and page 11? I was very, very impressed about this investment scheme entitled Childhood Campus Medicinal and Synthetic Chemistry Research Center. If I understand well, this actually in the same grounds where AstraZeneca was. Am I wrong in this?
Yes, Chair, you're absolutely correct. So Charnwood Campus is actually it's got different ownership, but it is all the old AstraZeneca site, and this funding is to refurbish one of those original. Well, there's buildings of various ages around the site, but it is to refurbish one of the buildings on the site and bring it forward. And obviously the opportunities, sort of high value jobs, investment, etc. So I think that's why it's been regarded very positively.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Jackson. I think it's very impressive, and it is a very welcome development for the region. I wonder whether we have any questions from the panel. This has gone too easy. Right. So if there are no more questions, can we consider any recommendations on this item?
I suggest we note the report, Chair.
Thank you very much. We know the report then. Thank you, Councillor. So let's proceed then actually to item 10, environmental services, fleet options. Again, I will invite actually Mr. Simon Jackson to give us a report. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Chair. So this is there's 2 or 3 phases to this. So there is a bit of a story which I've copied actually from the revised capital wording from the revised capital plan. So the first stage was when we were looking to extend the environmental services contract. One of the things that, and I wasn't actually party to this, but one of the discussions that took place between the prospective contractor and ourselves was around the financing of the fleet. So the service is actually outsourced and run by Serco as it was, but they put it to us that actually it may be cheaper because of our access to the PWLB, etc. It may be cheaper for us to finance the new fleet, refuse fleet that was required, rather than them to buy it and transfer the cost to us in the sort of monthly or quarterly service payments. So we looked into this and we did an evaluation, and indeed we did conclude that it was cheaper for us to buy it and incur the interest and the minimum revenue provision, MRP charges ourselves, rather than have those costs translated into the sort of ongoing outsourcing invoices that we would have received on a regular basis. So that was the first stage of this, and that was looking at my report in it's actually back in September 2018. So that decision was taken then. Now, subsequently, that report also did suggest that we would finance it 50-50 through internal and external borrowing. So at that time, the assumption was that it would be fully financed by borrowing. So there's two things with that really. One is that particular split. In retrospect, the Cabinet report probably shouldn't have had a specific split in it of that nature, because our Treasury circumstances vary, if not necessarily on a day-by-day basis, certainly develop on a sort of week-by-week and month-by-month basis. So setting up that particular split at that point in time wasn't very helpful. And then secondly, what we've looked at in the light of our budget situation, and this is what came forward in the capital plan and also the capital strategy back in September, and going to council September, October, and going to council in November, was that if we are able to fund the fleet via earmark reserves, that enables us to eliminate the MRP charges. So what we did as an exercise is look at the capital programme and look to see if we could maybe remove or defer some items, possibly with the view that they could be reinstated in a future date. So we could finance a big slug of the environmental services fleet cost, which is 4.8 million, through via reserves rather than on an unfunded basis, or essentially using borrowing. So that's what we did, and by doing that saves us an additional £300,000 to £400,000 worth of revenue costs going forward. So in terms of options, ideally we would have had absolutely loads and loads of capital reserves we could have used to fund the fleet in its entirety, and that would have enabled us to save the whole of the minimum revenue charge, and we wouldn't have been required to pay any interest ticket. But what we have done is looked at the programme with a view to minimising it, so we can therefore maximise the amount of reserves we're able to apply to the purchase of the fleet. So I hope that makes sense. So what we've done is we've done what we can, and the reason for that is to reduce the charge to the revenue budget, the general fund revenue budget, for the life of the fleet. So that helps us over the next 8 years.
Thank you, Mr. Jackson. I see that Councillor Draycott has a question, followed by Councillor Parsons. Councillor Draycott, please.
Yes, thank you, Chair. In 2018, when this decision was first made, it was quite contentious by some of the council. They certainly didn't support the idea. I thought it very strange that the contract was renewed, but the council had the responsibility of buying the whole of the fleet. And I think it's really come back to bite us, because at the time the argument was that it would be the best way forward for the council to do it, because of the public borrowing. But as Councillor Parsons has mentioned earlier, that option isn't available anymore, and we're going to have to use all our earmark reserves to pay for this, and our capital programme gets wiped out completely. All of the local works that go on in our wards, not to mention departmental projects that were included, put on the back burner, or perhaps will never even happen the way things are going. So this whole thing has worried me from the start, and it still does. And I just think, like I say, it's proving very difficult to deliver, and I still think we've got a long way to go. My question, Chair, is in the report on the last main paragraph. If I've read it right, it's saying that there's a B list of cuts that could be made if this doesn't work out. I just wonder what that list is, how it's been evaluated, and at what point will it be actioned, Chair? Because we're soon to discuss the budget for next year, which is horrendous in itself. And obviously, if I've read this right, more savings are available, which we've not seen sight of, which I understand because they're not yet needed. But it does worry me that officers are thinking that there is a possibility they will be needed because it's not going to be straightforward. So I think it's a very worrying situation and always has been from the start, Chair. Thank you.
Councillor Draycott, can you guide me? Where exactly is this paragraph?
Starts further savings are available on the first page, the last main paragraph.
All right, okay, thank you. Mr. Jackson, do you have anything to respond to this, please?
Yeah, a couple of things really. I think one thing we'd have to remember is if we weren't, we're buying the fleet. It's purely a finance transaction. So SOCO are operating it and they're responsible for maintaining it. So there's no operational management obligations or requirements on our part. I think what we need to remember is if we hadn't gone into this arrangement, and I apologise, I don't know quite what the number is and what the business case said, but we could imagine that the cost of the environmental services contract going forward would be 800,000, 900,000, £1 million more expensive than it is at the moment. So that's why we did this. So I think it's the fact that we're doing this. This has saved us some money. Leslie may remember better than myself, but I think it was 150,000 or so. We were 150,000, so better off financing the fleet ourselves rather than allowing Serco to buy it with their, and they would no doubt have had to take a loan out, and their loan might have been 5%, 6%, 7% compared to our cost of finance, which is much lower than that. So that's the that's a rationale. I think Councillor Draycott's referring to a paragraph on the main budget report, and maybe we could address that when we get onto that.
No, agenda item 10, isn't that what we're on? It's on page 3.
Yeah, so through you, Chair, it's on page 3 of the supplement for item 10. It states that further savings are available if the fleet can at least partially be funded through use of reserves. It's the italics part of the report.
Thank you.
All right.
Oh yes, apologies. That's what the capital plan report said. And that was basically, I think, saying what I've just said now, that by funding the fleet acquisition through use of reserves, this will save us some this will save us some revenue budget going forward. So that basically is suggesting that's an extract from a report that went previously. So that's saying. This is what that's what could happen, and that's subsequently what has happened and been approved by Council on the 9th of November. Sorry, apologies. I thought it was referring to revenue savings.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Mr. Jackson. We have another question by Councillor Parsons, please.
Hi, first of all, just a very slight correction to what Councillor Draycott said. PWLB is still available for something like the fleet. Yeah. It's only commercial property for the purposes of yield that PWLB is no longer available to the council. So it's not relevant in this case with regard to the fleet.
Yeah, thank you, Councillor Parsons. Yeah.
No, but originally, sorry, Chair, originally it was public borrowing, wasn't it? Isn't that what you said was one of the options that we were going to look at? And now we're not doing that. It's coming out of reserves. I thought that's what Simon said.
Yes, it is. Unfortunately, we're drifting into the technical details of local government finance, which is a bit odd. But this was a decision taken. This is not a decision taken on the grounds of access to external funding. It is how we allocate our actual reserves. It's to do with how we allocate our reserves. Actually, it is. Our funding is a bit odd. Actually, we can borrow money. We can go out and borrow money now. It doesn't actually attach to any particular asset or any particular capital program. So it is a bit odd. But this was a decision around using our reserves to reduce our. So basically, we've converted capital reserves to the benefit of revenue funding going forward. That's what this transaction seeks to do.
So we could still have used public borrowing to fund the fleet. Yes, we can do, and this is where it's all a bit odd. We could. So why haven't we done that then and saved our capital programme? Because it would the borrowing in a way is very odd. The borrowing is actually not the key thing here. The key thing is to be able to say and apply our capital reserves to the purchase of the fleet. That's the key thing. The issue is when our reserves are gone, they're gone, and then if we have to, we can then buy assets, so we can buy them through borrowing. But the problem we have then is if they're essentially unfunded, then a minimum revenue provision will kick in. So that's the bit we have to be careful about. So it is. So I apologise. This is confusing, but this is where this is sort of a little bit counterintuitive under the rules that we work with. But the key thing is less about the borrowing. It's more about how the application of reserves to this particular purchase. And when we look at the savings here, some of the savings there are some savings attributable to the fact we're using internal borrowing rather than external funding, but that's the relatively small part of it. The major part of the saving that this arrangement creates is through the elimination or the avoidance of minimum revenue provision charges. So I'm happy to sort of have a conversation offline. It does get quite technical quite quickly, I'm afraid, but it is to do with the application of reserves rather than the financing method in this particular case. So the answer to my question, that there is actually a B list then of further cuts or savings that can be made if necessary if this doesn't work out?
We've set the capital programme, so we're not intending to we've set the capital programme, which obviously can be amended in due course, but we've set it with a view that half of the funding is going to be through reserves and the other half will be through borrowing. So I don't think at this point in time we've got any intention to re-review the capital programme and go through that exercise. The next time we'll look at things in seriousness is actually in 2 years' time. So this time next year we'll be looking at the capital programme. I think, as we've alluded to, probably the major thing we will probably do in terms of a capital plan amendment mid-year is to remove, at some point we will remove commercial property investment from the capital programme to the extent that we've not actually completed our level of purchases, and make sure that's not in the programme going forward, to make sure we're in compliance with the PWLB regulations that we've spoken about. But in terms of fundamentally, what have we got in there now? What do we want to do going forward? While I reserve the right for something to happen at any time, at the moment the plan would be in the usual cycle to have a look at that this time next year for implementation through council with effect from 1st of April 2022.
Can I get to my question now, Chair?
All right, okay.
Yeah, I didn't ask a question. I was just merely answering a point. All I wanted to say, Simon, is that I recognise the decision with MRP, and I recognise the need for it going forward because it affects the budget next year. All I would say, so members are aware, MRP isn't a bad thing for us in some respects because it means we're putting aside money to replace the asset in 10 years' time or whatever. You know, MRP is part asset replacement money for that asset wearing out. So whilst in the short term we need to resurrect or we need to work hard on the budget for next year and the year after probably, we should never lose sight of the fact MRP is not a bad thing. We're doing this because it makes it cheaper overall, and it means that we don't have a £600,000 line going out of the revenue account to cover the MRP. But MRP isn't a bad thing. It acts as a building up of what I would call a sinking fund. It helps the asset be replaced in 10 years' time. It means the money's there when we come to replace the asset. So we do need to keep an eye on it. And when we do things to limit MRP or get rid of MRP, we as councillors need to be cognizant that it means the asset isn't necessarily being funded for future replacement.
Mr. Jackson, any response to this?
No, I think that's fair. That's fair enough. Nothing additional to add to that.
Great, thank you very much. We have Councillor Barclay next. Councillor Barclay, you need to.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I'm a bit slow on the button. Yeah, I mean, I think there's some sort of misconceptions regarding the capital plan. It's completely separate from the revenue budget, and we are not slashing the capital plan or any of the schemes of any of the items that are considered for all the towns and villages around the around the borough. The funding of the capital programme may be delayed or rolled over, but the capital plan is completely separate, and there is no intention well, you've seen what's come through council on the capital plan. The capital plan hasn't changed. I think Simon Jackson has explained that, you know, the next amendment is maybe we'll take commercial investment out of it. But all is not lost. A lot of the capital plan is funded through Section 106 money, especially regarding towns and parishes, and that hasn't changed. As far as the minimum, what Councillor Parsons said is essentially right. We're saving ourselves 400,000 a year in revenue expenditure over the next 8 years, which is 3.2 million, by internally using the money we hold to fund the fleet, the purchase of the fleet. But don't sort of go through the I think it's completely wrong to think that we're slashing the capital programme to afford the fleet, because that's just not the case at all.
Thank you, Councillor Barclay. Is this a question or it is a statement? Again,
Chair, is a statement really, just trying to clarify things for the committee.
Thank you very much, Councillor. Can we go to Councillor Seaton, please?
Thank you very much. I think this is marvellous, and I think the word that I like there is prudent. I love the word prudent, and I think it sums this up quite well. The only thing I regret is that in your introduction to this, Simon, our partners came to us with this suggestion. I'm hoping that it was I would like it to be our suggestion that we did this, because obviously we've saved quite a lot of money. It's something that we've got to do. The MRP there is for 6 years. Some of these vehicles will last, sorry, is it 5 years or 6? Some of these vehicles will probably last a lot longer than that. And
8 to 10 years.
8 to 10 years. Well, there you go. That's even better, isn't it? And as I say, I just think it's a very good proposal, and yeah, prudent. Thank you.
I understand this is actually another statement, Councillor Seaton. Thank you very much. Right. Any? Oh, no more hands here. Okay, lovely. Right. If there are no more questions, can I invite the panel to consider any recommendations? In particular, Councillor Draycott, do you have any recommendations on this
Well,
item?
rather than note in the report, I think as a panel we should recognise the history to this particular matter and how complicated it's proving to deliver. That's just my suggestion of wording at this stage.
All right. If this is your recommendation, can I go through the members of the panel to see whether everybody agrees? Councillor Bolton.
Sorry, can I seek clarity on that, please? I'm not quite sure what that means.
No, that's fine. Yeah. Councillor Seaton, can you, sorry, did you ask for clarity? So there was an interruption there.
Yes, please. I've got no idea what that means, the difficulty. So if you could clarify, that would be brilliant. Thank you.
Well, the fact that it started in 2018 under a particular financing strategy and how it's changed and changed, and that we're still here today, still not finally certain of how it will be delivered. That's all. I was trying to be quite neutral in the matter, Chair.
Thank you, but I still don't quite understand. Mr. Jackson, could you?
Yeah, it is a financing matter, and I think over time. So 2018 was when we made the decision about extending the. So the key decision actually was about extending the environmental services contract, and the financing the fleet was obviously an important issue, but that was subsidiary to the main decision. So what over the ensuing 2 years, the way I would look at it is, as things have changed, we've looked to make sure the fleet was financed in the most advantageous way possible. And I think we've arrived at, whether it's absolutely 100% the best way possible, is, I guess, is always arguable, but I think we've come to a good position on this. And in practical terms, in terms of delivery, I think most of the actual vehicles have now been delivered. I believe there are one or two still to come along. So I think practically, I think the manufacturers, there's been a little bit of delay due to COVID, but they are being delivered. The money will be paid over to the manufacturers. The capital plan will be fulfilled. And then, having set up this arrangement, we're now in a position of transferring cash and making the accounting entries. So it is, in a way, this, and having been to council on the 9th of November, that as far as I'm concerned, really is the end of the story. So there's not really anything particular to add on this topic as far as I'm concerned, if I'm honest.
Therefore, we could, at the panel, we could recognise the complexities and of the delivery and the length it's taken, and unless we just note it.
That's more or less what I was saying, Councillor Seaton.
Yeah. What, that you recognise the complexity?
That I acknowledge the complexities.
Okay. Can I invite Mrs. Conway to make a remark?
So what Councillor Draycott said originally was that she recognised the history to this matter and how complicated it has been to deliver. What Simon is saying is that, yes, there has been some history to this and it has been almost all delivered. And so then Councillor Seaton was saying about recognising the complexities of the delivery and the length it's taken. So I think you're talking similarly, aren't you, on the same topic? So I think what the panel may wish to recommend is that they do recognise, you know, they note the report, they recognise the complexity of the financial situation and that there has been some history to this matter.
Sorry, Councillor Draycott, it was the history part that I wasn't together with you on that.
Is that clear? Is that okay now? Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, I personally do not see any major disagreement between the two statements. It's just a recognition of complexities and complexities in delivery and challenges in delivery. Do I see Councillor Harris
Yes,
raising the hand?
can you hear me? I would use the word caution. Proceed with caution as well as part of this. That's all.
Proceed with. I'm sorry, I need to clarify one thing. Proceed with caution as regards what?
As it now proceeds, we need to note with caution as well the complexities, but also we need to also recognise that there's still much more talking to be had about it as well. So I would use the phrase with caution, but if other people don't agree with that trait, that's fine.
Okay. Sorry, I think again, Councillor Bolton.
Yeah, I'm afraid that I'm really confused here, because it seems to me that a commercial decision was taken to adopt the approach that was adopted, to buy the fleet. And as Simon has said, we're virtually all the way through the process now, and we maybe have one or two, whatever you call them, vans, lorries left to be delivered. And I really have no idea why we need to make a recommendation based on this. Personally, I would rather say, I will vote against making a recommendation on this, but I am happy to vote in favour of noting the report because it is a commercial decision.
It isn't a recommendation, it's a comment. It's a comment by the panel. We've just spent a considerable amount of time discussing it, and sometimes just noting something isn't always enough. I just felt that we should make a few comments about our thoughts on the matter.
Well, I disagree, which I'm entitled to.
Of course. Can we, Ms. Conway, can we actually just finalize the right phraseology of this comment, and then we go through each member of the panel, please?
So I think Councillor Draycott has proposed that a comment is recorded from the panel that they recognise the history to this matter and how complicated it has been to deliver it. I believe that Councillor Seaton would be happy to second that, and then it's to see whether the rest of the panel would agree to note that recommendation or comment.
Right, Councillor Seaton, do you agree to second that?
No, the reason I put and questioned Councillor Draycott, because I'm questioning whether we should do anything but note it. But I do understand, Councillor Draycott, that just to note all of the items that we've had today don't sort of recognise the complexity of the talking through. But I think to note it is sufficient. But also to put that we recognise the history behind it is equally as good. And I'm prepared to second both of them, really, either it's just to note or just to add a little bit of a footnote to that, just to make it look more interesting, I suppose. Because it's not a recommendation, it's not going to make it any smoother going through or anything like that. We're just being semantic, really, and just discussing words.
Yeah, I understand it is a comment. Is this Councillor Parsons, please? Yes.
Chair, I just wanted to know, this item's to inform us about the budget and to help us in the next discussion on 21-22. What this report does is inform us that this has been through a process which has saved us money and has bought us a new fleet. And it's been through due processes. I've been one of the people that's followed this through on a number of different occasions and challenged the funding model, and delighted that it was reconsidered and looked at again. And we've arrived in a good place with this. I don't want to do anything other than note this and have the item inform the next discussion that we have saved money in next year's budget by funding it from reserves, and we've been through a process to do that. I don't. It's not complicated for me. It's not a history. It's a basic process of decision making, which we as councillors challenged in its journey over the last 18 months to arrive in a good place, which informs the budget that we've saved money.
And is prudent.
Yeah, thank you very much, Councillor Parsons. I need to ask the advice from Mrs. Conway. Should we go through a vote or should we just add the notice?
I think in terms of the comments that are coming from the councillors in the panel is the majority are quite keen to note this report. And I think that the comments that Councillor Draycott have made will be captured in the discussion part of the minutes, so they won't be lost in any way. It's whether you want to confirm with the panel in its entirety that they're happy to note the report.
Chair, if it helps, I'm quite happy if the majority of members wish only to note the report, but I would ask that in the minutes my wording be included, and if that's agreed, then that's fine, Chair.
I personally do not have any disagreement, but I would like to listen to other opinions. Okay, I understand. Actually, we have noted the report, and we are going to minute your comments, Councillor Draycott. Are you happy with this?
Yeah, that's fine,
Lovely.
Chair. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So now it is time actually to go back to item 6, having actually discussed items 7, 8, 9, and 10 as requested. And so I will ask kindly either Mr. Jackson or Mrs. Tansey to introduce the report.
If I may, Chair. Sorry, so can you hear me, Chair? Sorry.
Yes, I can.
Okay, I just had a message. If I may, I'll just do the overview, and then if there are any difficult questions on the detail, I'll let Leslie take those, if that's okay.
Lovely. It is absolutely all right with me. Carry on, please, Mr.
Okay, so just in terms of the report, there's probably a couple of things I'll just sort of run through it. So the first thing, which is really obvious, is that COVID obviously colours a lot of the thinking and a lot of the estimates within this report. So that's that, as you would all expect, that's a major consideration in the exercise of setting this budget. One thing I would very much like to draw to the panel's attention is around paragraph 4, actually. But what paragraph 4, which is sort of the first bit of page part B. So it's page 6 out of 20 on my electronic report. But at this moment in time, we don't know what the funding, what the government funding settlement will be for Charnwood. So actually, we had the autumn spending review last week, and that obviously set out some of the high level numbers, but we don't yet know how they will translate into the settlement for ourselves. So that's due on the week commencing the 14th of December. So that's when we're expecting to hear something a little bit more definitive, but that's very much unknown. Reading the runes, it's not obvious. I think, if I'm honest, I'd probably guess that the outcome for us would be actually more negative than is presented in this report. But again, couldn't really say with any certainty until we do get those detailed numbers. As I say, middle of this month, so sort of 14th, 15th, 16th of December is likely for that. So important to say, really. And then I will just quickly sort of point out some of the key features. So on table on page 9, which is the general fund budget, and maybe the key, this is a summary of it all, maybe the key number I would draw to your attention is a sort of number in bold. I would say 2/3 of the way down, where the columns, where there's one column fewer, and the draft budget working balance at the 31st of March 2022 is projected on this budget to be 2.040 million. So hopefully, if you've got the report in front of you, you might be able to see that figure 2/3 of the way down on the sort of right-hand side, 2.040. And that means that by setting this budget, we're projecting our working balance will be above 2 million at the end of the year, which is important because £2 million is considered to be the sort of minimum appropriate level of working balance that we should carry. There are some details, but maybe the things on the general fund that members might be interested in are the sort of savings and pressures, which are on page 15 and 16. I've written down here, which are sort of appendix 1. So appendix 1 on page 15 goes through the various savings and types of savings that are included within this budget. And you'll see quite a list there. So savings and additional income generation, that totals 2.059. And then we have pressures on the next, or continues onto the next page, still within that appendix of 1.819. So we've got savings of just over 2 million and pressures of 1.8 million. And actually, the other thing I would point out with this is that there are within that, there are around about £800,000 worth of COVID-specific pressures. So I think going back to Councillor Hamilton's question earlier on, if you were at the top of page 16, the first item actually is the leisure centre, is what we've got in there for leisure centre. So we've assumed no income but no subsidy. So there's a £247,000 pressure. So what we're assuming is that, so if you were to assume COVID didn't happen or hadn't happened, then on this budget we would have achieved savings of around about £1 million, which would have been quite a good effort. Unfortunately, we've got COVID in there with that impact. Obviously, we'd hope to that those wouldn't apply from 22-23, but I just point that out as a very significant feature of that. We've got Loughborough Special, which is of interest to Loughborough councillors. That's set out on this detail. The numbers, to be frank, are quite small in the context of the overall budget, but I do know that Loughborough members are very often keen to see the detail there. And then we've also got the HRA budget as well, which is sort of summarised on page 14, and then the appendix 2 on page 17 sets out some of the detail of what's happening there. So generally, the HRA is under less pressure than the general fund, and the sort of savings and pressures around the HRA are less in terms of the fact that we've needed to make savings. It's just more around amending the work programme to reflect the work that actually needs doing. So the savings some of the savings are sort of things that we believe, having assessed the stock, that we don't need to do so much of, and then there are things where the pressures are things we need to do more of. So for example, we need to do well, there's some travel expenses saving, but we probably need to sort of we don't need to spend so much on furniture, but we do need to spend a bit more on Legionella. So that's the nature of the HRA, rather than in the general fund, where the actual fact that we do need to make savings is much more of the driver. So I've quickly done an overview there, and no doubt, hopefully, members have had a chance to look at it. And if there are any questions, then Leslie and myself and possibly Justin will hopefully be able to answer those.
Thank you, Mr. Jackson. To start with, I'm a bit confused because I don't know whether the electronic version has the same page numbers with the printed version, because as you were describing in your report, a table in particular page, actually in my printed version does not appear to have a table in this page.
Yeah.
So it is a bit confusing, I regret to say.
Oh, okay. Apologies. Yes, I'm the way I work is I've I have it on my. I look at the report off the website actually, and look at them on my tablet. So the first paragraphs I was referring to really were the introduction. So we've got part B to the report. So there's part A, which is the recommendations, part B, and then we've got background and context, and then paragraph 4 refers to the sort of uncertainty around the funding, around the government funding, and then at the end of part, as you move through part B, then table 1 is the sort of overall draft general fund budget, and you can see that table hopefully.
Okay.
Yeah, it's on the right hand side actually. I put my little numbers on this because sometimes there's the same reports in different wider reports. So it's actually, if you look on the right hand side, the table's on page 7 of 18. If you can see that on the right hand side, if you have that on the report you're looking at, if you look at the bottom right hand side of the report, it's got page X of Y. So page 7 of 18 in small, in quite small font.
Thank you very much for the clarification. There are quite a few hands. If I may, look into Loughborough Echo. Yesterday, there is actually an article in page 4 saying the council has been able to pay nearly 600 eligible companies, a total of 875,000 directly, as the authority already has the details which can go through security checks. Further down in the same article, it says, earlier this year, we distributed over 32 million of funding to around 2,600 local businesses. I just like to put this thing together with the information I have, your reports. Is there any matching there?
No, it's those amounts are amounts the government gave us to distribute out. So we got given the job basically of distributing business grants. So none of that was our money. The government gave us a pot of money, and we're just which we obviously have to reconcile. And anything that doesn't get distributed gets sent back. And in some cases, if we do distribute, if we do end up running out of funds, the government will top it up. But that's nothing to do with the budget, and you won't see those numbers flowing through our accounts. How it manifests itself in our actual accounts is we do get some money towards the administration of those grants, but that's what you will see. Those amounts quoted in the Loughborough Echo are basically grants. The government's giving us money and we're just distributing it. So that's what that Loughborough Echo article relates to.
Thank you. Councillor Bolton. Councillor Bolton, we cannot hear you.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I have 4 questions. So I'll just do them one by one. My first question actually links into something that Councillor Parsons said right at the very beginning of the meeting. I'm very concerned that the budget says that scrutiny committees will be reduced from 4 committees down to 2 committees. And the total saving from that will be £10,000. It just seems to me that the risk of not having sufficient scrutiny committees focusing on the issues far outweighs that cost or saving of £10,000. And as a member of the Scrutiny Commission that has been meeting every month, most of the time during the pandemic, and having seen our meetings get increasingly longer because we've been taking on work from other committees, I'd really like to ask your view on whether saving £10,000 actually justifies that risk that I've described.
Mr. Jackson? Mr. Jackson?
Yeah, so this was, I mean, the savings in the, what we did in terms of process, and Councillor Barclay will maybe want to add something on this, but we took to workshop with lead members a whole range of saving options, and this was one that was selected. So in terms of saving, there is a cash saving which we would estimate at £10,000. And I suppose the other thing, if I was honest, the scrutiny committees, the servicing scrutiny does take up quite a lot of officer time, both from democratic services directly, but also heads of service to a very large extent, and directors who need to prepare reports, etc., for those committees. So so there's I suppose there's a cash saving. There's also probably a resource saving. Whether that's a good or a bad thing to do is obviously arguable, as are many of the savings in here. And I think that's probably I think one of the things that you could possibly do with this, and obviously it's up to the panel, is to actually identify areas like this where you may wish to either comment, or there is another meeting before we put the final budget together in January. So there's a meeting in January scheduled, and then we'll put the final budget together in February. And that's an opportunity to potentially invite members along or officers along to answer that specific question. I think this particular question would be a question probably to the leader in reality.
Chair, if I can just comment on this issue, Chair, while Councillor Bolton's mentioning this issue, I too am hugely concerned. Two things I would want to lobby on. The first is I would challenge how much money those of us on scrutiny have saved over our time on scrutiny, with the challenge to certain projects and certain things that we've looked at. I think we've saved money. So if I was looking at cost effectiveness, I sense that scrutiny has saved money. I would certainly be putting my hand up saying I think we've saved money during our journey over the last few years by things that we've challenged. Secondly, if you ask me, I'll share it for free, because I think transparency and democracy are hugely important issues. So if anyone needs a scrutiny committee chairing free of charge, I'm happy to volunteer my service, because it's more important to me that we do things on behalf of the public than a few quid in our pocket, from my perspective on that issue. I have no issue on that, Chair. I think councillors should be paid their allowance, but if you want to chair a scrutiny committee chairing, I'm happy to do it free of charge. So I too would be hoping that when we come to writing recommendations in a month's time, we'll be saying that we're uncomfortable with reductions in the level of scrutiny on that particular issue. And I would hugely support Councillor Bolton's comments on that.
Thank you, Councillor Parsons. My second question is a similar sort of point. When we agreed earlier this financial year as members to reduce our member grant down from £1,000 to £500, it was actually sold to us as a one-off. Now, I know at the time that we probably couldn't have anticipated the sheer length of time that the pandemic would continue. But I have already spent my £500 this time round, because we are not allowed to give an amount below £250. And yet I have small organisations in my ward who are absolutely crying out for money to support the fantastic work that they're doing. I'm not necessarily expecting an answer on that, because it possibly is similar to the previous answer. But I think if you're going to take some of the money away from us, that we should be involved in the decision. And I know, Simon, you've said that we can, put in our recommendations and our thoughts, but it would have been nice to have been consulted before seeing it in black and white in the budget. My third point is perhaps more, definitely more substantive. On page 16, supporting living, housing benefit, etc. We've said 200,000, But in fact, in brackets before that figure, worst case could be 1.1 million of additional cost. So we're basically saying, oh, 20% is what we'll put in the budget. If, you know, as a qualified accountant myself, and to use Councillor Seaton's phrase of she likes the word prudent, why are we only taking 20% of the worst case scenario? It doesn't seem awfully prudent to me.
May I answer that one? Yeah. So apologies, that may be a presentational thing. So we've got, so the 200,000 is on top of what would be in the base budget. So the total is what?
Okay.
So the total, so it is, so this is a very, very difficult area over which we've got no control. So I think Carey Barnshaw has done a briefing on this, or there's a paper on this which I think has gone out to members, which or explains the mechanics. Yeah. So it's one of those where actually it's very, very difficult to set the budget on this, and so I get my excuses in early. But it's one which could be quite a bit worse, or it's one that could be quite a bit better. So the upside for this, the way it's a bit odd, but the upside, if our two major providers of supported living in the borough, which generate the bulk of these costs, around 90%, are the Falcon Centre and the Carpenter's Arms. Mm-hmm. We're in conversation with them at this moment, and actually, as it happened, we spoke to the Carpenter's Arms today. So the chief executive, myself, and Carey spoke to the Carpenter's Arms today and the Falcon Centre yesterday, sort of seeing if we can support them towards getting RSL status. So if they achieve that, our costs go down to nothing. But the other side of that is we can't do anything. We can't influence it directly. And the things that are going against us, one is their increasing capacity. Two is the rents are increasing, so the differential is increasing for us. So they're increasing capacity with the existing homelessness challenges around, as well as their capacity increasing. They're sort of moving towards full occupation as well. And the fourth factor is that it's a sort of technicality with the way the regulations work, is that under housing benefit, we were able to claim back 60% of the differential if residents were flagged as vulnerable. And of course, a lot of the residents are very vulnerable people who've got substance abuse issues, etc., etc. But if they're on universal credit rather than housing benefit, as increasingly they are as we move towards universal credit, there's what I consider to be a glitch in the regulations, in that we can't then construe those residents as being vulnerable, and therefore we can't claim the 60% surplus back. So all those things are moving against us. And I think they're set out quite well in the paper that Carey's
I've read,
circulated. So what we've done in the budget is have a guess, and so we've bet that there will be some additional pressure compared to the current year's budget, but that we're not necessarily going to suffer it all. But it is quite binary. So the sort of positives and negatives on this particular amount are quite significant. So there's a lot of sensitivity on that number, if I would put it like that.
Okay, thank you, Simon. And my final question, and I'm trying to find the page and I can't. Somewhere in this paper, you have budgeted for 2% pay rises.
Yes.
Staff, but I understood that there's now a pay freeze.
Yes.
For public sector workers who earn 24,000 or more. So what will the impact be on the budget? Right.
So I haven't wanted to be quoted on this. So firstly, technically, local government employees aren't. When the Chancellor announces a public sector pay freeze, we're not in that group that he directly that he directly controls, if you like, and can regulate. So he can't directly regulate our pay increases. Having said that, the pay increases local government staff get very much track the wider sort of public sector. So 0% is likely for us, and that would be a sort of positive. So sort of splitting out my personal views, the personal impact on me and on the government, on our finances. This would be a positive by about 350,000. So that's optimistic, if you like. But there are other sides within the settlement. So we believe that a new homes bonus, for example, would be probably 3 years worth of payments rather than 4. So that will be probably $1 million or so the other way. Then there's the income support schemes going to extend, which we hadn't realised, and no idea. So that's a positive, but we don't know how much. And then the other thing, which hopefully might be positive, but we don't know at all, is business rates retention. But until we actually get the numbers in the middle of December, very difficult to know. So there are various ups and downs. I personally think, if you were forced me to guess, that the best case scenario is that we will end up in the same position as we've set out in the draft budget. I think if I'm honest, I think there's probably more downside than upside. But as I say, we won't know until middle of December, and those changes will be reflected in the final budget, which will go to Cabinet and then Council in February. So we will see those. Coming through at that point in time.
That's great. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I think actually we need to proceed a bit. We have Councillor Draycott.
Yes, Chair. Like Councillor Bolton, I've got a number of questions, but I'll try and be succinct with them. First question is regarding the Loughborough special rates. Do we know if there's actually going to be a Loughborough Area Committee meeting? Because if there is, then that would seem to be the best place to discuss it. I just wonder if we could answer that first, and then that would help me later on. I don't know if Nikki's able to, whether she's got any idea.
As far as I'm aware, there will be a Loughborough Area Committee meeting in December, but I think, Sally, I don't know whether you've got any additional information to do with that.
Yes, through you, Chair, there's actually a meeting of the Loughborough Area Committee on the 16th of December to discuss that business.
That's fine, thank you. So I'll be brief on that. Could we have a bit of a breakdown on the item, the expenditure for Loughborough, which includes Loughborough Bloom? There's a lot of things put together there. I wonder if members could be just sent a breakdown. I'm particularly interested in how much Loughborough Bloom actually costs the borough. That's my first point and question. Second, I take a different view regarding the proposal to reduce scrutiny committees, bearing in mind that 3 of them have been cancelled for 6 months, and Scrutiny Commission has been carrying the work. I don't have a problem with it. And if there's going to be 2, an extra one that's actually working, if it meets monthly, like Scrutiny Commission does, I think it could do the work quite adequately. And even before COVID, the 3 scrutiny subcommittees, their meetings, most of them lasted less than an hour. So I really don't think we were getting the best. So maybe with a Scrutiny Commission and whatever the second one's going to be called, doing all of the meeting once a month, I think that could be quite thorough scrutiny, Chair. A couple of questions. There's a list of posts, and I think it says there's another, I can't remember the exact wording, but could we know the total number of posts, please, that are being deleted in these recommendations? And I'd also make the point, and I'm sure I've done this before, it would be so much easier if it was set out like the Loughborough special rates is, where the items are numbered, and then with it you have a separate paper with a few lines about what each one is, right? Because there's like at the start terms of conditions on one of the reductions. I don't know what the terms of conditions are and what impact that would have. And there's a few other things that are not clear. So if we could just have a bit more information on some of these reductions, Chair. And then my next point is to do, going back to leisure centre and Fusion. For a lot of people who went to the leisure centre, they had annual subscriptions. And if you take, for example, someone who paid their annual subscription in, say, August 2019, it was frozen in March this year. Customers were offered the choice of having your money back or frozen. A lot of people I know agreed to have it frozen because they didn't think it would go on that long. So that money, March to August, April, May, June, 6 months, right? And there's a lot of people in that position is owing to them. So how is that being addressed? And I don't actually know how much that amounts to, and who would be responsible for paying back to the public their annual subscriptions that's been frozen. And that also applies really to the town hall, because there's an awful lot of bookings, and I declare a personal interest there, that again were frozen and are on hold. So, you know, are people going to be offered again the choice of either having the money back or continuing to freeze? And I think that applies to both the leisure centre and the town hall, Chair. And my final question is actually to do with the HRA. And there's two amounts in it. One is reduction in fire alarms budget, which did concern me greatly. Fire alarms budget, I couldn't dream of why we would be reducing our fire alarms budget when you look at recent events in London. So I definitely would like some more information on that. And the other on the HRA, tenancy services, cleaning of HRA properties, quite a large amount, 13,000. And I'm worried that that's actually the new cleaning contract that took about 4 years to get through the Housing Management Board. Is just being delivered and is doing a brilliant job. Is it that cleaning contract that's gone? So those points and those questions, Chair, and I'd welcome the answers if possible, or sent to us as soon as possible. I've tried to be brief, Chair. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor. I don't know whether actually Mr. Jackson wants to address any of these questions now.
Yeah, I will try. So I think on the HRA, if there are specific questions there, maybe the way forward is to invite the head of service to come along and talk about those. As I said, really, I don't think there's any question that we're trying to save money by reducing our fire alarm budget. I think it's more a case of the fact that we'll have completed the maintenance programme, and having a look at it, and having had a look at it, we consider we need to spend less on that area next year. So that would certainly be my understanding, but I obviously haven't got the detail around that. So maybe if Peter Oliver's invited to the next meeting, if that's a concern. Just in terms of some of the staffing related items in the savings, and I think it is fair that some of the savings are couched in quite vague terms, and that's actually deliberate, because they are, so some of these things are subject to a process. So the staff terms and conditions, that is now out there amongst staff, but basically that refers to the essential car user allowance. So the essential car user allowance costs 270,000 a year. So there is a view that we want to reduce that. That will be subject to an HR process, as a lot of these things will. So the fact that it's in the budget doesn't. The fact that it's in the budget doesn't actually preclude the fact or necessarily imply a 100% certainty in terms of amount, because these things are subject to an HR process and a consultation. So certainly a central car user is one of those. In terms of some of the other savings, some of them are, we've not detailed them out in this report for members, but some of them are vacant posts. So having been through the exercise with the heads of service, they believe that, or vacant part posts actually. So a lot of them are, so heads of service believe that they're no longer needed. A lot of them are actually where people were working full-time, have gone part-time, or have gone on to phased retirement. So we're finding that within the budget, there's a budget for 5 days a week, but at the moment, the post holders are only doing 3 days a week because they're now working part-time or on a phased retirement or whatever. So what we've done is removed the 2 days a week from the budget, and Leslie and the finance team did a lot of work on that analysis of payroll, which enabled us to get at those sort of savings. And then there are other savings in there as well, which are the heads of service considered can be made, which are sort of on efficiency lines, so won't be having any detriment or any change to the service being provided. So from a resident perspective or a member perspective, you shouldn't really know anything, but there are things like reducing the number of managers down from 4 to 3. And again, clearly there's a process to go through for the head of service before those things can be actioned. So that's why those things are fairly vague. So they are, to be honest, internally focused, and so apart from understanding that's where the savings come from and the fact there shouldn't be any detriment to service, we haven't really wanted to publish anything else because there's sensitivity with some of this stuff. As we go forward, by the time we get to the new year, we should be in a position where, and again, we're taking HR advice on the process, but individuals should start to know whether they're in a process or not. You can understand that some of these things are quite difficult. So and then I think the Loughborough in Bloom analysis, I think we can probably think that Leslie will take a note, but I'm sure we
certainly
can
get a breakdown of that for you, Councillor Drake.
Yeah.
Obviously, it's 353,000, so obviously you want a full breakdown of that, which we can obviously go back to the officer and get those details on. I think in terms of Fusion, Simon, that's something in terms of the memberships being frozen, that's something that'd have to be taken up with Fusion direct. And I don't know whether it's something that Head of Leisure and Culture can raise as a query, but that is something that externally will be looked at by Fusion managing our contract. But then in the town hall, again, that's Head of Leisure Services as well, where we'd have to get clarification on that point.
Okay.
Thank you very much. Mrs. Conway. Yes.
I just wanted to make the panel aware that this information will be coming through by email prior to the next meeting, because the next meeting will be focused on finalising your panel report.
Thank you, Ms. Conway. Can we you should go to Councillor Barclay, please? Councillor Barclay, we cannot hear you.
Thank you, Chair. I hope you can hear me now. Yeah, just a couple of points, major points, really. One of the challenges we face with the budget is indeed the supporting living allowance. This is unique to Charnwood. Well, not unique to Charnwood, but it certainly is a problem a lot of councils don't have. As you've seen, that would cost us £1 million a year. It was, as Simon's explained, so that's a major problem. The other thing is we're creating this budget without knowing what the government settlement would be, which will come through, we're hoping, by mid-September. It has sometimes come through on Christmas Eve. I think Simon made the points about the new homes bonus and it's decreased from 4 to 3 years. That'll have a major impact on us. But we're waiting for the government's fairer funding review and the take up of the business rate retention. But I think what we've got to bear in mind is we still have further savings to make, depending on what the settlement, not necessarily in 21-22, but certainly going forward. I mean, we're looking to maintain a minimum working balance of £2 million, and that's what we are trying to do. So it isn't a nice to have, it's actually what we've got to do. We are fine at the moment, and we will be next year, depending on what comes from the government's settlement, but there is still work to do, and that's all I've got to say, Chair.
Thank you very much, Councillor Barclay. It is Councillor Parsons again.
Thank you, Chair. Just 2 or 3 points. The first is just a correction. I think on page 17 that the headings for figures in Appendix 2 needs to be, the zeros need to be removed, because if the housing income team reduction of travel expenses is 2.8 million, I think we've owned that one. So I just think before that goes to cabinet, zeros need to be removed at the top of those columns in Appendix 2, because that's a tad expensive on the expenses on that one. So just a couple of points. Again, being a bit more strategic in general in terms of where we are before we get down at the next meeting to the recommendations and bits and pieces. So I agree with Simon's analysis of the HRA. It's less worrying at the moment, but I do note in the HRA account the slight reduction in income that we're proposing next year. And that could be the beginning of a slippery slope with more people running into arrears, less money around for people post-COVID when the economic issues begin to hit, when the health issues bypass. So with repayments due on the big loan starting in 24-25, it could very quickly catch up with us. So it is less sensitive right now, but again, needs a BDI kept on the HRA situation. A couple of questions on the general account. The overall issue I have really is that the sensitivity against our track record is really tight. We're in this budget putting down 2,040,000 as the level of reserves that we're budgeting for when this goes to cabinet. Our performance in recent years would warrant that that's an extremely tight margin, and that's before any of the major events that could significantly affect that happen. So were supported living to come in at a much higher rate, were new homes bonus to not fall in the way we need it to, the sensitivity around that figure is very tight. I look at the savings side of the general account and the 2 million of savings, whilst recognising there is 1 million of that of big numbers at the top. I won't go into the detail, that's not for me for this meeting. It's for the way we try and set the report up. But if I look at our track record, as I said at the start of this, in contextualising this with the number of years I've sat on budget scrutiny, audit, looked at the numbers and the accounts, our track record of achieving those sorts of savings and being accurate to that sort of level of sensitivity by the 2021-2 end position and the reserves, it doesn't instill confidence in me in achieving that. We've not been that accurate and precise at pulling things in that closely. And I worry about what's our plan of action if one of the major events which could affect this comes to pass. Do we just drop below 2 million and ignore it? Do we go somewhere else to provide that gap in funding? At what point do we react in the cycle? What's the trigger that's going to act that? If all of a sudden we find out that the 1 million is going to be realised in supported housing, at the point, is that the trigger that we then do something? I realise it's an ongoing process, but for us, scrutinising this and then auditing over the next year, those are important points that I need to get to grips with, or we need to get to grips with. Just in terms of one specific question, on page 9, which is the general fund summary page. We haven't got the same numbers on the electronic system. I think it's page 7 of 18 in the bottom right-hand corner, but page 9 on the printed version. Business rate appeals adjustment, is that where it is because it has to be there and at the level, or is that a choice we've made to position it where it is and at that level on the business rate appeals adjustment figure?
Mr. Jackson?
You want to answer that, Simon? The 1.5 million that we brought in as business rate appeals adjustment, that was on the back of last year's business rate appeals, bringing the provision down across all of the preceptors. So obviously we were in a pool last year and we agreed that the provisions for business rates appeals were too high across all of the districts. So that's a consequence of bringing that. It's an accounting adjustment, but it's a real budget income to the council. So if you'll see in the statement of accounts, all the preceptors will receive a contribution from that doing that exercise. It is a one-off. Item. So that's obviously helping the 2 million balance. Just to add on the reserves, looking at page 9, we have got some other reserves that we can use. Reinvestment reserve, 418,000 for one-off items. We have got a capital plan reserve which can be used for capital or revenue. So that is a pot of money. As you can see, we've not actually allocated anything against that for next year. And we are sitting on another £1 million of specific reserves, which we can look at. So there's 5.2 million overall on the reserves that we've got. But also at period 7 for this year, we are doing some detailed budget monitoring and looking at whether or not our outturn position for this year, because we've obviously set a revised budget. We've obviously been very cautious with our COVID figures for what we've put in the revised budget this year. And obviously, like Simon's already explained, we've anticipated another sort of 800 and 900,000 for next year of COVID. So those figures could be looked at again before the final budget gets presented. And I think that's the right thing to do as well, just to make sure that we've covered every angle.
Yeah, no, I agree. The point I just wanted to make there was that in going through the detail of these accounts, there are some big lumps there. So if we would like-for-like accounting for 22-23, that 1.5 million would have to be found somewhere else the following year because it's a one-off adjustment. And I know, and I feel sure the government is going to make good some of these big issues that are facing local authorities. But I think the doubt that we all have, and we have to budget prudently, which we're trying to do here. But again, just from our perspective, there are some very big issues, sensitivities, which could significantly affect what we're looking at. And I recognise the difficulty in trying to set the budget because of all the doubts. All I'm trying to do is, from our perspective, it's our job to make sure we've identified and recognised these and done our job to point them out. And I know cabinet members will have done so and understand it. I know you as officers will, but it's our job in scrutiny also to do that and make sure we've challenged that. And there are some big sensitivities. There are some big numbers around that could significantly blow 2,040,000 straight out the water. And again, our track record of coming in bang on the numbers when we're trying to make savings is not good, in my personal opinion, over the last few years when we've had a less turbulent environment in which to do so. And maybe this will force us to do these things because it's been less turbulent, we've been slightly more relaxed and we've had reserves and we've been able to work through these situations. But we really do need to perform now on this budget and hope the government provide us with some support in helping the figures work.
No, I think that's fair. I think if I look at the savings, there are some, and I would go down them. But I think what we've done compared to the MTFS, and we have done quite an exercise, which again, Councillor Barclay may wish to talk about. But these numbers we have in here are pretty robust. So in terms of if I look at the sort of first one is the MRP and the interest savings on the fleet. So we've done that one. So that one's pretty much in the bag. The staff terms and conditions, that may not be 200,000, but that will be something of that order of magnitude. The managed vacancy allowance, as I say, the finance team have done a lot of detail on that, so we're pretty confident that can be justified. And the next big number down is the commercialisation and rental income increase. And I think where we are with a commercial property purchases, plus actually a bit of a windfall's been the, I think I can talk about the vaccination centre as it's been on East Midlands today, so not super sensitive now, but I think with some of the income we're likely to generate on that, I think I'm reasonably confident with those top four numbers. And then the sort of 340,000 again, heads of service have put these forward, so as a senior leadership team and no doubt cabinet will be holding their feet to the fire on those. So I think in terms of the big numbers on the savings, I'm reasonably confident. I think the big one for me is this settlement in 2 weeks' time. So and that's the one where I have a certain level of trepidation. As I say, there are ups and downs in that, but there is quite a lot of volatility as Councillor Parsons draws out. I hope that when we get to the final budget, we won't be required to be showing any material adjustments, but that is a possibility. And certainly if we're well down on government funding, then we did bring cabinet members some options for change, some of which were rejected, but we may have to revisit those sort of conversations and put forward additional ideas in the new year should that be required. And obviously we're hoping not, but I think we do need to be realistic and reflect the the potential downsides in the situation that faces us.
How will we get to influence the period of time between this? I believe this goes to Cabinet on December the 10th. The settlement is a fortnight away, which is likely to be after the Cabinet meeting have passed this budget.
Yeah.
And we're then making recommendations on a budget which you may well be making substantive changes to post the 10th of December, because the settlement may force you to make changes. How are we going to manage our process to reflect what might happen in that intervening period? Because the time frames are very tight for us to do our job properly.
Nikki's got a hand up. I think it's a bit of a, unfortunately, it will be difficult. I couldn't pretend otherwise. So it may have to be a bridge we have to cross when we have to cross it. I mean, as I say, plan A is we won't be that far out, but if it's plan B, then it might be. So I'll let Nikki comment on it, because she's probably got a better grip of agendas and timetables than I would have.
So if you look at the draft budget cabinet report that you've got that is going to the cabinet on the 10th of December, the recommendations are that the cabinet endorses it for consultation. So it is actually going out for consultation, as it were. And then at your meeting on the 5th of January, you will have a final report that will have recommendations that you wish to make. That will go to Scrutiny on the 11th of January, who, if Scrutiny Commission wishes, they will forward that to the Cabinet meeting on the 11th of February, which is the same Cabinet meeting that will have the final draft budget. And it will also have your recommendations in and officers' recommendations and responses as per the usual panel processes. So you do influence it.
Yeah, no, I understand that, but it's just if there are changes after let me just give a random, if it is exactly 2 weeks and it's the 14th of December that we get settlement, we need to know what changes have been made off the back of that settlement on the 14th, because we might make recommendations that become redundant by the 5th of January because of what's happened on the 14th of December.
So I think this is where we're drifting into the final item on the agenda when we're looking at how you're going to do your recommendations. So by the 5th of January, you have a final report. I'm aware that the timelines are tight. They always are for budget scrutiny. And so we can discuss this further during that item.
I think I understand Councillor Parsons' point. It is going to be difficult. So, you know, literally we get the settlement and week commencing the 14th. So that could be the 15th, 14th, 15th, 16th, 17th and 18th. And historically, for whatever reason, it often comes out on a Thursday, which was the 17th. So the 7th, so that actually is about 3 working days before Christmas. And then there's very few working days after Christmas. So if there's anything, if we are materially adrift on the government settlement, then I think what we'll have to do is, you know, we'll have to have a very, you know, in reality, we'd have to have a very rapid conversation between myself, the senior leadership team, and Cabinet to decide what we want to do, if anything. So, you know, if there's a big difference, at minimum we'll do is just reflect that in the numbers to be more realistic in terms of the settlement. And if we need to do something additional to that, then we'll have to make a quick decision. And I think that will have to feed through into, so by the 5th of January, so we could put it on the agenda for the final meeting, which wouldn't be necessarily, no, you're shaking your head, Nikki?
I think it depends on when the budget goes to Cabinet, because the budget goes to Cabinet in the 11th of February. The way the process works for budget scrutiny is on the 5th of January, the report that we consider has to be virtually final.
Yes, I was going to
I've then got 3 days to turn it around to get it to Scrutiny Commission to fit within the deadlines.
All I was going to suggest was on the 5th of January, then maybe I could do a verbal update on the results of the settlement, just so that the panel are aware of it. There won't necessarily be any decisions, and I don't think it will change anything. I don't think it would change anything in the report. I think it's just an additional information item on the evening. If the panel would be interested in that, obviously.
I'm sorry to interrupt here, but I think actually we have completely lost the order. We are still on the draft budget 21-22, item 6. And I understand actually there were quite a few questions around a number of statements, but being cautious of the time, I would like actually to ask the members of the panel whether they have any recommendations. Are there any recommendations on the draft budget 21-22?
Suggest, Chair, that we note the consultation. That's the next day. Cabinet agreed consultation, isn't it? So just note the report.
That you're endorsing the recommendations to Cabinet.
Yeah.
Sorry, can you repeat this one, because there were some interruptions on the line?
That we're endorsing the recommendations to Cabinet.
We are endorsing recommendations.
That's what's on the report, yeah.
Any other comments? Thank you. So I think now actually we can progress actually the item 11.
Chair. There are a couple of blue raised hands, so I think Councillor Barkley would like to speak.
Oh, sorry, I'm sorry. I missed this. Okay. Councillor Seaton, yes, please. Councillor Seaton.
You're muted, Brenda.
Yeah, it's a quick comment really on the fact that it's been asked we find out the full funding of Loughborough in Bloom, and you've roughly told us how much it is, which is absolutely horrific, but taken in isolation. And if we have a figures that show us how much it costs, how much this costs, that costs, and the other, I feel sure that it should be counterbalanced with the benefit. and the amount of staff it employs, and the amount of community involvement there is in it. So I'd hate it just to be a one-sided paper that just came back with cold facts and figures, because there are benefits from it. But I do need to still say that 350,000 is horrific. But there are going to be benefits. So, as I say, if there's going to be a paper on that, I think we need to have it both sides reported on as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Can we go to Councillor Barclay, please?
Yeah, appreciate the work the Budget Scrutiny Panel has done very, very quickly. There are potential upsides if the supported living allowance, if some of these providers become registered social landlords, we will be able to claim quite a lot back from the government, and we're working on that, and we're talking substantial sums, hundreds of thousands of pounds. So just a brighter note in what we see the sort of gloomy side of it, but we have to deal with what we're faced with. And as I said before, even if this budget goes according to plan, we still have to look at the year after, and we're very well aware of it. That's all I've got to say, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor. I'm really sorry I missed actually the two raised hands. I promise not to do this again. Let me check. Oh, okay. We don't have any more blue hands out there. Right. So should I repeat actually the question whether there are any further recommendations on item 6? No. Okay. So can we progress with the item 11, which we already started, and this actually proposed recommendations review. Now, obviously, by now you realize actually that there are some milestone dates. From my notes, one is the 18th of December. By the 18th of December, we need to have actually all the recommendations in, because on the 5th of January, there should be a final draft report. And this, following that final draft report, there is another meeting on the 11th of January, which is the Scrutiny Commission. And the final draft report has to go to the Scrutiny Commission on the 11th of January, which effectively gives actually 3 working days. This is actually an enormous pressure on Mrs. Conway and everybody else who's involved in this report. So now my understanding here is actually that we are going to go through the minutes of the previous meeting and the minutes of this meeting and see whether there are any recommendations by the panel. And I would like actually to ask the panel at this stage, do you have any additional recommendations you may have forgotten to put forward? Let me check the blue hands. None. I would like also to ask the panel whether you need actually a few more days to reflect upon the things we have discussed and come up potentially with some recommendations, which we may consider to put actually in the final draft report. Would you like to have a few more days, for example, a week, to reflect and consider the possibility of some additional recommendations?
Yes.
Sorry, who said that?
Councillor Bolton.
Councillor Bolton. Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, please.
I would certainly like the rest of this week to reflect on what we've discussed and to put forward some suggested recommendations. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Bolton. Anybody else?
Yeah.
Yes, Councillor Draycott.
Yes. Comments that would be putting forward would be part of a draft report that goes to our meeting in January. Is that what you said? The
Yes,
final
of course, there will
agreement.
be. Of course, you see, if you send to Ms. Conway CC to me, some additional recommendations, there will be an informal process for these recommendations to go through the panel informally and be considered actually to be included in the final report.
Through you, Chair, if I can just clarify what the situation is that the panel needs to come up with any recommendations, if they wish, regarding the budget scrutiny process for 2021-22. So you've had a selection of information today, you've had a selection of information in September's meeting. What is the expectation for the panel is that a final report will be submitted to the Scrutiny Commission, which will hold the information about how the budget process, scrutiny process has been sort of performed, and will also have any of the recommendations that you wish to put forward. So the aim is that at the 5th of January meeting, that report needs to be in as final a possible state as it can be for it to be then submitted to the Scrutiny Commission on the 11th of January. So how you get to that point is something for the Budget Scrutiny Panel to discuss. How it happened last year, when I think Councillor Parsons was the chair, was that Councillor Parsons put forward, please correct me if I'm wrong, but I think you put forward some recommendations and then had an email discussion with the rest of the panel to determine which recommendations would go forward in the report. So that is one option.
Thank you, Ms. Conway. Councillor Draycott?
Yes, Chair. What Nikki has said, I would support, because that's far better. Because if it was just less open for any member to send any comments in, there could possibly be comments that's not been discussed or mentioned today, and that would be part of a draft report, and it would be very hard to change it. So I really think that all the comments need to be kind of, well, I think at best we should do it now and try and do it now, or something needs to be put on paper and then there's an email discussion about it like last time, Chair. The two things I think, well, the biggest thing I don't think we've mentioned and that should be included in any report is the issue of council tax going up 5%. And I think that's inevitable. We don't have any choice in the matter. That's in the report. And, you know, I don't think we can not do that. And I think we have to acknowledge that in some way. So that's just a starter. But I don't think it's a case of just sending comments in, drawing up a draft report and presenting it to the next meeting. There has to be comments in, collated into some form of document, circulated, and then email comments, which is a lot of work. And I think it'd be far easier if it was done now, Chair.
Can I?
Thank you, Councillor Bolton. We cannot hear you, Councillor Bolton. Not hear you.
It's now 6:02. We have been talking about this for 3 hours. Some of us have other meetings that we need to go to. So personally, I'm not sure that doing it now is the best idea.
Right, so that leaves us with the option of sending comments in to a named person who's going to put it all in a document and then circulate it around to everybody for them to make further comments. Is that what we're looking at? Yeah.
I personally think it's a very reasonable process to do. And of course, you see, Mrs. Conway is here to facilitate this. Ms. Conway, any comments?
It's difficult to comment really, because I'm aware that in the past budget scrutiny panel, that wasn't a task of the Democratic Services Officer. Right. It was a task of Councillor Parsons. Now I see he's got his hand up, so I don't know whether he wishes to contribute.
Okay, I'm new to the process, so I'm very keen actually to listen to some suggestions. Councillor Parsons.
Yeah, if I can comment, I think that Mrs. Conway's correct that last year, as memory serves, the one point I think she just slightly missed out in the process was what we're talking about now, which was, I think I received recommendations from panel members. I then collated the report. I then sent out the report to panel members asking if, I think there were 10 or 12 points that I raised last year on behalf of the panel. They were distributed to all the panel members. I wrote that report, not the officer. I wrote the report, distributed it to panel members, and asked panel members to comment if they were happy that the 12 or 10 points went forward. And then when that all came back, they were happy that those points went forward as presented. So they weren't all my points as a chair interpreting what everybody said. Everybody's points were brought onto that distribution list. Obviously, I wrote some on behalf of summarising the previous notes and observations, but then everybody agreed the points that went to the meeting on the 5th of January or the equivalent date. But it is a job, I believe it's a job for the chair to write up that report. It's us as members that are commenting on the process, but it is quite, it's a challenging little piece of work, and an intense piece of work to get everybody on board with the number of recommendations that you want to put forward, that the committee wants to put forward. And then there is the final opportunity at the meeting for any changes or omissions or anything else before the final board is split.
Thank you very much, Councillor. Now, my little difficulty, I'm very keen actually to take this process in my own hands. And definitely, you know, I want to follow actually a very democratic process where everybody will be in the position to provide actually their recommendations. I have actually a little difficulty with the process because actually, according to the document I have in front of me, the process includes actually, after recommendations are put forward, there should be a voting where actually each member of the panel agrees. So how we are going to do this via email? Sorry, Councillor.
At the meeting on the 5th. At the meeting on the 5th, you can ask members to agree which ones go forward from that meeting on the 5th. You can collate the report and bring it to the meeting. You can have it ready on the date that's necessary for the publication of papers. But the meeting on the 5th, if there's 10 recommendations and there's a vehement opinion at the committee against one of them, only 9 go forward from the 5th.
Oh, I quite like this suggestion. Ms. Conway, any comments on this?
I think that will work if all the panel members are aware that we can't rewrite the report on the 5th of January and then circulate it and get it all agreed again before it goes to Scrutiny Commission on the 11th. Because there is only 3 working days. I mean, I love my job, but I'm not really keen to work on the Saturday and Sunday before Scrutiny Commission. So that's my only caveat. If you do that process with that Councillor Parsons says, is that you need to make sure that you're not rewriting the report on the 5th of January. So you need to agree the process beforehand to make sure that you're all very clear.
Thank you. Councillor Seaton. We cannot hear you, Councillor.
You can hear me and you can see me now. Thank you. Would it be too onerous to have another meeting purely for that?
Is the chair, if all of us send our comments into the chair,
yeah,
collate, is there a deadline needed to do that by, Nicky? Would you advise us on that point? Because I think that would help then. And then the chair puts it all together and that's the paper that comes to the next meeting. Is that what we're saying?
So the panel report is a fairly standard template, which I've drafted the template, but it does need a introduction by the chair, and then it needs all the recommendations that you decide to agree. So there is an element of the administrative process has been completed. So you need to come up with these recommendations. In an ideal world, we would have a panel report ready to go with the agenda publication on the 18th of December for the 5th of January meeting. The reason that's obviously come forward is because we have to meet our 10 6 clear working days, and we've got Christmas in between. Now, if you're all very clear and familiar with what's actually in that report, there is probably some wriggle room in terms of publishing it maybe 2 or 3 days later, but it's got to really go out before the 22nd of December, I would say, because when we come back to council at the beginning of January, we're coming back on the Monday and budget scrutiny is on the Tuesday.
So really, the document that the chair collates all the information and puts in should really go to members straight away for any immediate comments. And if it's straightforward, we're fine, it can go to the January meeting, but that would allow us a bit of room if there are any issues to do with any of the comments, and the chair would have to direct that. Is that what we're looking at? Yeah.
It needs to be in as final position as possible for me to publish it for the agenda for the 5th of January. And then on the 5th of January, that's really where, if you've got any particularly, if you've got minor amendments to the wording that you don't all agree, or you've got any particular, like earlier on in the meeting, you've had difference of opinion about scrutiny committees, the number of scrutiny committees. So at some point, the panel is going to have to decide whether they wish to recommend a review of the number of scrutiny committees or whether they wish not to, because you've got differing opinions in the panel. What I don't want to happen is to be at the meeting on the 5th and you can't decide which of those recommendations you're going forward with.
Yeah.
So there needs to be some discussion quite early on in the process to agree.
Thank you very much. I think actually I'm forming my view. I will stick actually with the original suggestion, just to take the next week, put your thoughts together and try to communicate your thoughts with me. I will collate these thoughts together and circulate these thoughts to all members of the panel. And let's try informally, of course, and I will collect actually all the feedback in order to help Ms. Conway and myself to come up actually with a preliminary draft by the 18th of December. That sounds reasonable. Any comments?
That's great. Yeah.
If we all agree, then thank you very much for your participation. And I'm sorry, actually, these meetings are a bit long, but I quite like actually people to be able to express their opinion to the full. So thank you very much for taking part in this meeting. And I'm looking forward to your comments within the next few days.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Anything from our officers? Any comments from our officers? No. Thank you very much. Have a nice evening.
Thank you.